Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had paid the price of greatness part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story madwoozy from AO3. So let's start the video. You were never very good at taking compliments, especially since you were only 9 and they were all the same. To a kid, adults always start to sound like broken records. My goodness. Her eyes. An unfamiliar woman in the grocery store stopped in front of you and your parents, bringing her hands to her face in excitement and bending down to you. They're beautiful. You took a step back nervously and grabbed onto a metal bar on your mother's wheelchair. Your father quickly noticed your discomfort from behind you, as it was familiar, and he placed a cautious hand on your shoulder to remind you that he was there. Thank you. Your mother smiled kindly up at the woman, taking the pressure and spotlight off of you. She's lucky she didn't get mine. Your parents were also very acclimated to people outwardly commenting on your eyes, no matter how invasive or audacious the comments sometimes were. And for the first few years, it was always nice, having strangers openly appreciating their daughter's beauty. But then it started to become jarring and frustrating, how everyone always seemed to use the same words. Pensive, bewitching, stunning, and enchanting. Your parents had heard those words more than enough times to last the rest of their lives. Your eyes were a fascinating mixture of light yellow and gold, with flicks of brown, coming to a happy medium that was often referred to as amber. And to give credit where it's due, if a person made eye contact with you and didn't say something about the dazzling color, that would have been stranger. They seemed to have this very alluring glow in the irises, as if they were slightly illuminated, always able to capture the most evasive light. They were undeniably beautiful. And even though they only turned to this color when you got your quirk at 3 years old, they didn't seem to change when it was engaged. Because, in more ways than one, your quirk was always engaged. They're enchanting. They're really not contacts. Nope. They used to be brown, but they turned this way when she got her quirk. Wow. Amazing. Thank you again. Your mother smiled, looking up over her shoulder at her husband, and raised her eyebrows. Honey. Right. Your father cleared his throat and nodded at the woman bent down in front of you. We should be going now. Your father pushed your mother's wheelchair down the aisle and waved goodbye to the woman. He took your hand and pulled you along with them, but you couldn't, looking over your shoulder back at the woman who was still staring in awe. You wished people would just stop staring. And thinking. God, their thoughts were so fucking loud. You winced, your eyes closed, and brought a hand to your left temple, making a sorry attempt at crushing the voices into silence. But everything was so boisterous and annoying that your 9-year-old brain was completely incapable of tuning them out. Your quirk only got more powerful with every year. And every year, control of it slipped just a little further out of your grip. When it first manifested, and you started reading your parents' minds and reciting their thoughts to them, they realized that they might have a prodigy on their hands. Your mother had a mind-reading quirk, too. Or rather, she could sense when people were lying. But she was a very conservative woman, as was your father. They both could have gone on to do amazing things with their diverse powers, but they didn't want to be in the spotlight. They weren't interested in heroism or spectacles. So instead, they stayed discreet and humble. They worked the edges to help out and kept their privacy intact. Your mother worked for the government as a private interrogator for villains and criminals, and they paid her so well that your father didn't have to work and could spend his time caring for his disabled wife and young daughter. But as you got older and your abilities far surpassed simple mind reading, your parents became fearful of what you could do. They took you to doctors and trainers and specialists. Anything they could do to at least have some security or to be able to understand your limits. But in those times, you didn't like what the doctors were thinking. Not one bit. More often than not, they were power-hungry creeps, like most of the population turned out to be when you poked around in their thoughts. At the doctors, you always ended up intentionally butchering the conversations and forcing them to end so you could leave. Your parents took a few years to catch on to that. Eventually, at age 5, when you started cracking the walls in your family home every time you cried, your mother abandoned the idea of wanting to understand your power any further. It was far out of their comprehension, and so they started ordering you not to use your quirk at all anymore. They never admitted this to protect you, but they were both terrified of what you could do, and they treaded on eggshells around the topic of your power. For the rest of your upbringing, they regularly reminded you to never tell anyone about your quirk, no matter what. They thought it was unsafe not only for others, but for you, if the wrong person caught wind of such a strong quirk. They lied to anyone that asked, including family and teachers, and so did you. You lived the next 4 years as a quirkless child, although it had never actually been turned off, not even once. You wished more than anything that it would just shut up, but you had no choice but to be satisfied with pretending. What's wrong, sweetheart? Your father bended down beside you after noticing that you dropped your teddy bear onto the floor. Too loud. With your eyes winced shut and tears brimming in the corners, you nodded. You could hear sirens and swear words and muttering and whispering. Every single sound was echoing in your head as if it were an endless black void, a chilling chamber built only to house your insanity. Darling, your mother rolled in front of you and slipped her hands under your arms, lifting you up to sit on her lap. It's okay. We'll leave soon. Now you had both hands covering your ears and you were slightly hunched over, groaning in pain as your father searched around the wheelchair's bag compartment. Then he pulled out your pair of sound-canceling headphones. He slipped them over your ears and lifted your chin with his finger. Better? No. Yeah. Good. He smiles. Your parents continued their leisurely stroll around the quiet store, grabbing everything that they needed for their weekly shop. You always liked coming out shopping with them. You always liked being with them in general. Then, after they had got everything, the three of you got into line at the entranceway cash registers. You stood still for only about 30 seconds until a thought passed you by, and you started excitedly tapping your mother's knee, jumping off of her lap. Mommy, can I get a chocolate? No, baby, remember I said das. Please. All right, fine. Go grab one. She smiled warmly, all too familiar with the fact that there was no way she was able to resist the sweet innocence on your face. 1. Your father scoffed at your mother's weakness and bent over the top of her to give her a kiss. You let out an excited squeal and turned around with your hands up in the air. You moved fast down the hall, weaving around an old lady, and ran all the way to the third aisle. And that was when you heard the gunshots. You gasped and your face was painted white as you spun around to look for where the sound had come from. The sound was deafening and sharp and unfamiliar, making a ball of nausea knot up in your stomach. You looked to your parents for answers, but your father was lying behind your mother's wheelchair on the floor. And your mother? Well, she was facing the door as the masked man in black clothes and a rifle entered the building. Bodies were dropping like flies around your mom, as the man sprayed every person in his eyeshot. He was mowing down the crowd, and he had started with her. Your chest was hollow, your lungs had caught fire and burned up, and you froze. Your body hadn't properly reacted to what you were seeing yet, because your mind simply hasn't registered it to be true. The screams were waiting come out. The adrenaline was yet to ignite your bones, and your lungs had been replaced with anvils. You couldn't feel anything. Your body was just still. In your peripherals, everything was blurring into dull grays and whites, losing color. And you could see multiple people desperately scrambling on their hands and knees away from you, and heading to the furthest corner in the store. But not you. You weren't running. You were on pause. You didn't even look at the people running away. Your vision was shaky, but your eyes were locked onto the twitching bloody chunks of marred flesh falling off your mother's face. Her one dangling eyeball and limp, lifeless arms hanging off the edge of her wheelchair. You were watching the holes in her chest spew out sad squirts of gore. The masked man emptied his clip and reloaded his gun immediately, only 2 meters away from your mother. He turned to face you and paused in the store doorway for a moment. Of course, you were the only person dumb enough to be just standing there, right in front of him. In Inquisition, he tilted his head and smirked an eerie smile that would have made you drop dead if you had spared him a glance. You had never wished for blindness more than right then. The man followed your distracted gaze, confused as to why you weren't looking at him, and that was when he saw your deceased mother and father. Must be her mom. Shit, poor kid. Better put her out of her misery. His internal voice was somehow even more terrifying than his face. It was worse than the bloodlust in his eyes and the corruption in his smile as he brought the rifle up to point towards you, only hesitating for one moment, before he fired. You were still looking only at your mother, and the bullets crunched in on themselves 1 foot away from your face. What the fuck? The man thought. He shot again, unleashing 6 rounds. All of the bullets stopped right in front of you, scrunching up, before the useless pellets dropped to the floor with metallic clinks that were blood-curdling in the shop silenced by terror. The man could see in your eyes that the soul has been ripped out of your body. There was no more light. You didn't even look human. And you started to shake. Your jaw started trembling and cramping as your young mind failed to truly comprehend the disturbing carnage in front of you. All the blood and gore and warfare that you had just witnessed was enough to drive any person mad. And today you were no exception. The man's head flicked away from you as he readjusted the hold on his gun and fired multiple rounds at 2 people who were hiding in one of the aisles, hoping they were out of sight. He showed them no mercy, ripping their lives away with his only concern being the amount of ammo he wasted. The clock was catching up to him, and he didn't have time to worry about a little kid. But nevertheless, his thoughts betrayed him, as he couldn't help but think about you again. How did she dash? As the man turned back around, he saw you were finally looking at him, and he felt himself genuinely startled. Your body looked so tense and your eyes were wrathful and depraved. There was this raw, burning hatred in you that he didn't expect. Not from a little girl. So much malevolence surely couldn't come from a little girl. His eyes were slightly winced as he tried to assess what you were doing, before his face suddenly jarred into torment. He convulsed, his features spasmed, and were painted with thick agony, and he brought both hands up to his suddenly throbbing head, dropping his gun. Your right eye twitched right as the man's head exploded. Like a watermelon, the pieces of him went flying everywhere. His blood splashed your face and you stared at his decapitated body as it tipped over and crashed to the ground. And then, the scream finally came. You had a blindfold on. You put it on just 2 weeks ago after the massacre, and you hadn't taken it off, except to shower. It was black and soft and tied at the back of your head. Many people had tried to get you to take it off, but they had no such luck. You hadn't said much in the last 2 weeks either. What was there to say? You were out of words. And that was precisely why you didn't bother objecting when 2 suited-up men approached you at your government care group home, asking if they could speak with you. You didn't complain or argue, or even say no, simply because you didn't have the will. You kept your mouth shut as they introduced themselves and explained where they were going to take you. Then, they took you for a long car ride where you sat alone in the back of a chauffeur. Your legs dangled and your head craned back against the rich leather of the seat. When you finally made it to the agency where they had taken you, they offered you their hands to help lead you inside. You politely declined their offers and calmly walked up the stairs on your own, despite being blindfolded. It was as if you could see through it. You walked with no fear of running into anything. The men lead you to a secluded room at the back of the agency, the 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐺 headquarters. They took you to a room with the shades drawn and 2 chairs sitting opposite one couch. You didn't ask any questions and sat down on the couch. For the next 10 minutes, you waited, exchanging in small talk, reminding them that you were only 9 when they offered you coffee, and you waited for them to knuckle down on what they were going to tell you, despite already having read their minds. One of the interviewers, who you soon learned his name was 𝗓𝗓𝗄 through his thoughts, was initially confused about the blindfold. His partner watched him as he started to slowly wave his hand in front of your face, unconvinced that you weren't able to see through it. But your eyes were closed underneath the blindfold. Of course you couldn't see. You didn't need to anymore. Still, wanting to pass his distasteful test, you brought your hand up in a flash and snapped it around the man's wrist, squeezing it tight. He pulled away, confused, but thoroughly impressed. He held his wrist with his other hand and let out a sigh to gather his thoughts. Listen, 𝑦/N. We have something we want to explain to you. You nodded once, bringing your hands together on your lap, and allowed them both to get serious. It looked as though they were finally ready to stop wasting time. We understand that what happened to your family a few weeks ago was beyond tragic. All of Japan is with you in your grief, and we can only imagine how horrible everything must be feeling for you right now. Please tell me to shut up if I say anything that upsets you. But Since you have no registered contacts for extended family, unless you find a respectable guardian, you will have to be taken into government housing or group homes until you are old enough to fend for yourself. However, my partner and I think that is less than ideal for someone like you. We want so much more for you than that. We think that you deserve a chance to choose the life you want to live. The man paused, his words sharpened by his hatred for the man that killed all those people that day. You should not be forced to meet the same fate that your mother and father did. We want to give you a chance to choose differently. He said that as if what happened to your parents was their choice. Your head was down slightly as you subconsciously replayed the events of that dreadful day, and your heart had still not quite accepted that they were gone. And maybe it never would. Lives have a way of lingering, even after death. So, Japan's government has a special training program available to a select few elites that was created and cultivated to serve as an effective, fast-paced refinement course to hone in on your skills and prepare you for a career as a pro hero. The program has given us some of our most valuable pros in the last 10 years, and is highly reputable. Sen, the silent man nudged his partner. You're forgetting that she's 9. Use some simpler words. No, I understand him, you replied calmly. So you want me to join this program? Sen nodded. We think you would be a great suit for the program. You would have mentors and caretakers to guide you for every step of the way. You'll never have to be alone. And not only that, but you'll be with people who have gone through the trials and tribulations of life, just like you. People that you can relate to and empathize with. Sitting on the sofa with your feet hanging and your hands together on your lap, you felt so small and insignificant. But at the same time, it felt like you were carrying the weight of the whole world on your young shoulders. And you could handle it. Will I be out of group homes? Will I have my own bedroom? The men glanced at each other quickly and then back to you. Absolutely. The other man spoke next. We already have somebody in the field who is willing to take care of you. He's a lovely man, and you will get the chance to meet him before anything is final, to see if you like him and are comfortable training under him for the next 5 years. His name. 𝗬𝗏 𝐒𝐻. Hero name 𝐻𝗏𝗏. You didn't recognize it. But, to be fair, you were never really allowed to tune into all the hero hierarchies anyway. You were pretty oblivious when it came to the rankings, like who was any good and who wasn't. I just want to make sure you're aware that there is absolutely no obligation for you to agree to any of this. If you have no interest in being a hero, we will not hold you to a job you don't want. We are only offering this to you because you have a special quirk with enormous potential and so much inherent talent that we know you could do amazing things. The choice is yours, Y/N. You will not be letting anyone down if you refuse. Only myself. What's that? You twirled a thin bracelet on your wrist. If I say no, the only person who's going to face the consequences of that sacrifice is me. I'll go back to that crappy house with all the other rude kids and stay there until I'm 18. Then I'll be out in the world with no family or friends, no money, no qualifications, no anything. I'd be writing myself off. Both of the men were extremely shocked and thrown off hearing such refined, confident words come out of such a young, damaged girl's mouth. If anything, it only improved their perceptions of you and how much potential you really had. The program will give you all the necessary training and preparation that you need to excel into a hero occupation. And if all goes to plan, by the time you are 16, you will be automatically enrolled into the most prestigious hero academy in the country, with lots of other kids your age aiming for the same thing. You will finish off your remaining 3 years with the school, and when you graduate at 18, you will automatically be hired as a pro under any agency of your choosing, or you can go on to make your own like others from this course have done. You waited in your thoughts for a long time. The idea of being a hero was exciting to just about any 9-year-old, let alone someone who had always thought of heroes as far-fetched concepts, something never even remotely attainable for people like you. You weren't even allowed to watch them on TV. They were that unreachable. But the men were right when they saw potential in your quirk. Because you knew you could do just about anything if you just had a little rage in your heart. Despite the initial dream factor of the offer, the main thing that you were thinking as you considered taking part in the course was, what other choice do I have? You knew now, since your family was gone, that you had no life waiting for you outside of this program, and really nothing left but yourself in general. You could at least try. Maybe you could carry on the part of your power that was inherited from your mother, and you could go do all the things that she wanted to do. You could check her boxes, live out her dreams, and do it all out of love for her. Yes, you could be a hero for her. You tilted your head and lifted it slightly. Can I keep the blindfold on? Because you still didn't want to see anymore. The two men glanced at each other sparingly. Well, you might need to be able to see stuff for the kind of training you're going to be doing. You need to move around and dodge and fight in all sorts. I don't need to see for any of that. Neither of them were convinced, but they both had open minds. You did have a knack for impressing people. Do you mind if we test that theory? Your nose twitched. Give it your best. All right. Both the men stood up as they thought of what to do to put you to the test. They needed something simple that would demonstrate your ability to see without your sight. Then, they had you stand to your feet and remain where you were, while one of them walked over to the office desk. He grabbed a pencil that was sitting on top of it and turned around to face you. I'm going to gently throw this pencil to you. And if you can catch it, you can keep the blindfold on for as long as you please. Understood. You didn't say a word, only bringing your hands behind your back and linking them, breathing calmly through your nose. Are you ready? Yes. The man glanced experimentally at his partner, unsure of why your hands were behind your back, and if it were even possible for you to catch it like this. He briefly wondered if you were taking any of this seriously, or if you were playing games with them. But he wanted to try anyway. Okay, 3, 2, 1, dash. The man did a gentle underarm throw, and you didn't move a muscle as a small silver pencil sharpener came from the desk flying through the air, stopping in front of you, and catching the pencil perfectly in the tiny hole. The pencil and sharpener both floated in the air, and you brought your hand out in front of you, holding it flat. The items drifted over to you, and you dropped them into your grip, closing your fist around it. Both of the men could barely breathe. They were so astonished. Wow, /and fantastic job, the man who threw the pencil said, rubbing his head in confusion. He looked to his partner, and they both nodded at one another. Very well. You can keep the blindfold. Good. You sat back down onto the sofa. So, when do I start? The men glanced at each other one last time, each properly, smiling for the first time since they'd entered the room. Then they looked back at you with excitement evident on their faces. As soon as we go get your bags. Hey kiddo, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mumbled as he walked through the kitchen, coming into your view. What ya doin'? He was wearing casual clothes and dragging his feet because it was finally his well-deserved off day. He had an empty cup of coffee that he just finished, and he placed it into the sink when he walked past. You had been staying with him for a week already, and although you hadn't been very bubbly and energetic, you did really like him so far. Just doodling. 𝐒𝐫 walked over to where you were sitting on the living room couch, and he looked down at the sketchbook on your lap. He narrowed his eyes, looking at the beautiful intricacies of a fig tree you had been drawing. All the details were jaw-dropping, but what really drove him up the wall was that you were wearing your blindfold. Holy shit, he whispered in astonishment. /and you drew that? That's a silly question. You said while adding details to the leaves. He scoffed. You're right, it was but damn. You didn't respond, and he simply watched you for a few minutes, dazzled in awe. Kid, do you mind if I ask you something? Yep, you continued to sketch while he sat on the couch beside you. Why do you wear this blindfold? Your pencil flicked around the edges of the leaves, and you bit your bottom lip. Because I've seen enough. He calmly looked at the side of your face, inspecting how the black fabric of the blindfold slightly bunched at the top of your nose bridge. Then he looked down at the book as you continued to move the pencil around the page with nauseating skill. He didn't know what to say. You mean, of the world? Yep. I've seen so much, I don't want to see anymore. You said as if it's the most casual thing in the world. Plus, everything is quieter with it on. 𝐒𝐫 had thousands of questions he'd been wanting to ask since the moment he met you. It was kind of amazing how you were such a mystery to everyone, but the exact opposite was true for you. You knew everything about everyone. Mysteries didn't exist to you. Yet, you remained one. So, you're a telepath, right? That's what they tell me, you replied calmly. Telepath, clairvoyant, psychic. It's all the same shit. Whoa, Miss Potty Mouth. Who taught you all those words? You pursed your lips and didn't look at him. Who teaches anything to someone who knows everything? You think you know everything? Everything? No. Too much? Yes. He paused for a moment, thinking about how true that statement probably was. It made his shoulders sag. Thinking about how much you had been exposed to at such a young age, it really was revolting. And so he wanted to lighten the mood. Or at least try. Okay, I'll bite. Can you tell me? 𝐒𝐭𝐲 glanced across the room at his open window, and he stroked his chin in thought. The name of my first pet? Kitty. You snapped instantly. That's easy. Everyone names their dash. She was a fish. He choked on his own saliva, leaning back into the couch with wide eyes. She died because you knocked her tank off your nightstand and were too scared to pick her up. You screamed and cried as she flapped around on the carpet. Okay, fine, I'm impressed. What the fuck, he whispered while he stared down at your book again, and he suddenly felt a little jealous of your power. So, since you wear this blindfold, are you able to see some other way? Or is it see-through? I only say that because I don't see you walking into walls very often, and you've got the whole blind Picasso thing going on right now. I don't need my eyes to see. You mumbled as you started to work on the tree trunk. My quirk shows me the way. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 tilted his head. So you can see with your mind? Something like that. Can you see me? Do you know what I look like? Yep. I could count the hairs on your chin if you wanted me to. You sussed. I can't physically see you right now, but I still can. It's an energy thing, I think. There's a strong picture of you painted in my mind. I use your memories and vision that you use to see yourself. Like, if you look in the mirror, I can see the image of what you see through your thoughts. But I can also feel sight. And to be honest, your wings are the most prominent thing about your aura. I can sort of feel how you look. Or how big that coffee table is, or that cup. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. My mind is powerful, and it can take in information without seeing. Or hearing. Or even touching. His jaw was agape. Damn, kiddo. I think you're smarter than me. You have smiled. I get that a lot. That's interesting to hear how you explain it. He chuckled under his breath and then raked both hands through his hair. Well, anyway, how are you taking this whole training thing? It's pretty tough, isn't it? They have you doing some ludicrous crap? I'm managing. You shrugged one shoulder and tilted your head while sketching some shading. I think their tests are easy. Whatever grade they think I'm at, I'm a lot higher. Oh really? He asked. Would you like me to pass that on? Like let them know so you can move up? Progress faster. Yeah. I just want to hurry up and be a hero. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 let out a breathy laugh and then patted your head. Your time will come, kiddo. No doubt about it. You nod once. I know. Hawks and Endeavor were standing together in the viewing stands of the training facility. It was an enormous building built to train powerful pros, and it had 4 different quarters. Each was designed to mimic different real-life situations and biomes. There was a mock city, a big green grass field with some stray trees, a water biome, and a dark room. Endeavor was there because he had his son training in the mock city. And you were on the grass, with a teacher. Hawks was resting his elbows against the railing, leaning forward and looking through the glass to where you were being trained far down below. Endeavor was beside him, standing tall with his arms crossed. She's crazy strong, right? You were standing in the dead center of the huge turf grass field with your instructor 5 meters in front of you. You were dead still with your hands relaxed in your pockets as huge rocks and piles of dirt and even tree branches swirled around your body and up into the air, with organized chaos. Your hair was blowing and you looked bored, while the huge chunks of nature being controlled by you, following your teacher's instructions. He was strapped head to toe in protective gear and was directing where he wanted you to move all of the items with his pointed finger. He wanted you to focus on keeping everything perfectly uniformed. So as rocks and sticks and grass all came together to make a perfectly balanced swaying infinity symbol that swirled around the 2 of your bodies, he was impressed. And so were the pros watching. What's her deal? Endeavor asked. I don't know, she's honestly hard to read. But by no means am I going to give up on trying to get through to her. I know she really needs some support right now, and she doesn't have many people to fall back on, or anyone really. I think seeing what happened to her parents really messed with her head, you know? She doesn't speak unless spoken to, she barely eats, and she refuses to take off that blindfold. No matter what. She's so quiet for a kid her age, but it's not like I don't understand why. How is she doing all of that with a blindfold on? And why does she wear such an ugly thing? Somehow, she uses her quirk to see. Man, I wish I understood how. But she said the reason is that it feels like her eyes have betrayed her, so she doesn't want to use them anymore. 𝗏𝗧𝗏 explained with honest compassion. I get it. I mean, if I saw what she saw, I'd probably want to claw my eyes out too. 𝗵𝗲𝗏 shook his head. All she's doing is holding herself back. Wasted potential. I don't think it's holding her back at all, 𝗏𝗧𝗏 argued. Just look at her. 𝗵𝗲𝗏 narrowed his eyes as he watched you ripped 4 trees out of the ground without moving a muscle. The root systems and all came to fly around and join the pattern as more dirt and leaves flew up, filling up more space in the facility, as the instructor pointed his fingers around and yelled out orders to you. She trains hard and well, and her power is kinda hard to even comprehend. She's propelling and improving so fast, I have no idea where her limits are. It's so strong that it kinda seems like it still affects her day-to-day life sometimes, as if she doesn't have full control. A power like that is useless if she can't control it. The instructor brought his open hand out into the air and clenched his fist closed. Suddenly, all the items in the air came to an abrasive stop. Everything froze. Boulders, trees, sticks, dirt. Everything went deadly still in the air. And the man signaled for you to drop it. And again, without moving even a finger, everything fell to the ground. The banging and crashing sounds from all the weight shook the walls of the facility, and 𝗵𝗲𝗏 steadied his feet in shock. 𝗏𝗧𝗏 blurted out an amazed chuckle. You see? It's almost scary seeing such a young kid with that much power. Look at her. She's amazing, 𝗵𝗲𝗏. Don't try to deny it. It makes me wonder how far she's gonna take this quirk. It's exciting, isn't it? 𝗵𝗲𝗏 crossed his arms again. She might have a good quirk, but she lacks real raw strength. Look at those scrawny arms. All of her strength is based on a technicality or a technique. When it comes to being a pro hero, I don't see her getting to number 1. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 didn't understand why he felt a little offended by 𝗵𝗲𝗏's statement. But he took it personally. Nah, that spot is reserved for your son, ain't it? 𝗏𝗏𝗏 muttered sarcastically. Why don't we bet on it? Bet which one of our kids makes it to the top first. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 glanced back out the field to see all the items moving around again. He had a soft smile. 'Cause Lord knows it'll be one of them. 𝗵𝗲𝗏 wasn't entertained, but he offered out his hand for a shake anyway. Fine. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 grinned. Good. Easy money. Where are we going? Well, since you've been absolutely killing your first month of training, I figured it's time you get a little break. You know, do something a little different. He explained with a smile. I'm bringing you to my good friend's house. He's another pro, and he's actually the number 2 hero, so maybe you should try to get an autograph while we're here if you can. Sell it on eBay or something. He chuckled and you half smiled. You were sitting beside 𝐒𝐻𝐽 in the back seat of a very fancy car. Before leaving the house, he had said that you were going somewhere fun, and so you were almost excited about it. He can be a bit of an asshole sometimes, but he has some neat training grounds in his house and he welcomed you inside so you can get out of that stale facility that you're used to. Why else? He grinned at your attention to detail. I normally visit his place to discuss normal hero work, every couple weeks. I'm just behind him on the leaderboard, so we have a lot of stuff to relate to on our radars. When stuff is red hot, we hit it together. And I normally go alone, but today I wanted to bring you along to get you out of that place. You never understood why the heroes seem to care so much about the leaderboard. Everyone was so focused on getting to number 1 that it washed out their actual morality or desire to help people. Their merits of heroism were pretty much shot to hell the moment it became a competition. Plus, he's got some kids too. There are kids there? Sure are. I figured it would be nice to spend some time with some kids your age for the day. And if you like them, you can come back to visit or train with them whenever you want. Does that sound good? You rested your chin on your palm and tilted your head towards the window. Yeah. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 smirked and looked out his own window. Sweet. You held 𝐒𝐭𝐲's hand as you walked up to the front gate. You waited patiently as the doors opened to reveal a huge hidden property with multiple dwellings, bonsai plants, lakes with koi fish, and gardens. You could see the actual house, and the path to it was well decorated. It was absolutely beautiful, and it all belonged to the same man. You walked up towards the actual house and ran your finger along the golden plaque that said Todoroki. And when you arrived at the front door, 𝗵𝗲𝗏 came to open it before 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽 even knocked. You heard his heavy footsteps thudding towards you, and then the door opened. He was in casual attire, and for the first time ever, he didn't have any flames up. You had seen this man hanging out with 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽 a few times, and you assumed they were quite good friends, though he always looked angry and you didn't like his thoughts. Not one bit. You looked up at 𝗵𝗲𝗏, and he looked down at you. You offered him no kindness on your face. "Welcome," he said in the most unwelcoming way possible. Then he looked up at 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽. "Let's go straight to the office. We have a problem to discuss." "Sure." 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽 shrugged, squeezing your hand slightly. "Hey, is your boy here?" 𝗵𝗵𝗏 turned around into the house. "𝗵𝗲𝗏." "Coming." A high-spiriting woman came sliding around the corner, smiling and shuffling her feet fast. She had white hair with flicks of red, and glasses on her nose. She ran up to 𝗵𝗏𝗏's side, smiling and waving at you. Then she noticed your blindfold, and was very surprised when you waved back at her. "Take 𝐬/N and keep her entertained. Hawks and I have some business to tend to, and we don't want to be disturbed." "Sure." 𝗵𝗲𝗏 smiled at 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽 too. Then she reached out her hand to you, assuming that you would need to be led. "Come on 𝐬/N. Let's go." She wasn't your age. You couldn't help feeling disappointed by that, but you took her hand anyway. You gave 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐽 one last look over your shoulder before you were dragged off into the Todoroki family home. You kicked off your shoes and 𝗵𝗲𝗏 brought you through the halls into the kitchen. She was wondering about the blindfold, but didn't want to ask you any invasive questions. She wanted you to enjoy your time at their home. She pretended not to notice at all, which gave you an instant sense of respect for her. "Sorry, my mom's not here right now," 𝗵𝗲𝗏 muttered with a nervous smile. "Anyway, I'll take you to meet my brother. He's gonna be a hero." A twang of hope crackled to life in your chest. "Really?" "Yep. He's super cool. He got both my parents' quirks, and he trains all the time with Dad," she explained passionately. Though, it was easy for you to read how much she was not saying about the situation. She held onto your hand. "Come on, follow me." You bit your bottom lip as 𝗵𝗲𝗏 led you down the hall and up the stairs. You arrived at the room 15 seconds later, and she knocked on the door, raising her eyebrows at you excitedly. A few seconds later, the door clicked open, and a boy who was almost exactly your height stepped into the frame. He half smiled up at his sister. His hair was split down the middle in 2 colors, which was the second thing you noticed about his appearance. The first was his eyes. Heterochromia. You had never met anyone else with eyes that were inherently unique before, and his were beautiful. That was before mentioning the scar that covered his whole left eye, but you barely noticed it. The heterochromia had struck a chord in you. You felt an instant sense of relatability with him, and you quickly started to wonder if people always commented on his eyes like they did to you. You couldn't wait to ask him. "Shudo, this is 𝗬/N. 𝗵𝗲𝗏 gestured down to you. "Dad's friend's daughter. She's your age." You didn't bother correcting her about the daughter thing. Shudo's eyes came to land on you, and they were sparkling. He thought you were pretty, but he also looked a little confused, and without really thinking about it, Shudo waved his hand in front of your face and narrowed his eyes. "Can she see me?" You nodded. "I can see you." "How?" "Shudo, listen, can 𝗬/N hang out with you for a bit? I have to get started on lunch, and Dad is with his friend in his office." His gaze darted between you and 𝗵𝗲𝗏 as he wondered. "Okay, I guess." 𝗵𝗲𝗏 looked down at you with a smile that she assumed you couldn't see. "You going to be okay with Shudo for a couple hours, 𝗬/N? "Sure." "All right. I'll be downstairs if you two need anything." She waved goodbye and skipped off down the hall. You stood there. "So, you want to come in?" he asked. "Thanks." You walked past him and into the room, taking your time to look around. You held your hands behind your back and stood in the center, getting familiar with the smells and the layout of the room through feeling it. You liked it. There wasn't too much clutter going on. You could see an All Might figurine on his chest of drawers. He must have been a fan. "So you da? Why do da?" You both stopped, and Shudo stared at you, nervously closing the door to his bedroom. "Sorry, you first?" he muttered. "No, please," you shook your head. "You go." "I was just gonna ask, Why you're wearing a blindfold? He clicked the door shut and stood there staring at you. Are you playing a game? I can play too. It's not a game. You smiled. I just wear it. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 tilted his head. But that's weird. Maybe. You shrugged. But I like weird. Don't you want to see? I told you I can see. But it's really hard to explain, so please stop asking about it. But I can't even see your eyes? I'll feel weird if I'm the only one who can see. He looked grumpy. It's like I'm looking at a wall. You dropped your shoulders. You really can't just drop it? It's not a big deal, I guess. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 looked off to the left of his room. But I'm gonna be distracted the whole time. I just want to know why you're wearing it at least. You sighed and rolled your neck out. Then you held out your hand. Fine. Give me your hand. What? 𝗧𝗪𝗧 pulled back. No, why? I'll show you why, you said calmly, flapping your hand in front of you and waiting for him to take it. If you really want to see, I'll show you. But fair warning, you won't like it. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 stared anxiously at your hand for a while. His main thought was how this would be the first time he's ever held a girl's hand, which was why he was so resistant to take it. But he wanted to. So, very slowly, he reached over and put his hand in yours. And in the next moment, you showed him everything. Your life flashed by his eyes in a matter of 3 seconds. Bright and fast flashes of light, dark, blood and water and crying and so much fucking screaming. It all washed by him in a short instant. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 jumped away and gasped, holding his hand as if it were in pain. What the hell was that? He hissed, looking vaguely traumatized. That's why I wear the blindfold. Make a little more sense now? Can we drop it? That was your mom? His face was not doing well at hiding his shock and distress. What happened? I mean, how dash? I said I don't want to talk about it. Can't we just hang out like normal kids do? Please. He blinked a few times to gather himself. Okay, sure. You could tell he was feeling guilty and wanted to do anything to make you feel a little better. But I don't have many games. That's okay. What else can we do? Or why don't you tell me something cool about yourself? Well, he rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. There isn't much cool about me to say. All that is in my life right now is my dad and mom. But I don't want to talk about them either. Alright. You saw a vibrant image of 𝗧𝗪𝗧's father attacking his mother during the night while 𝗧𝗪𝗧 tried to stop him. You could already sense the fear in the entire family, from when you first walked into the house. The terror is practically burned into the walls. And none of them are very good at hiding it, especially not 𝗧𝗪𝗧, who seemed to cop the brunt of his father's barbarity. Then, a picture of his mom staring at him with a burning fear in her eyes that makes you feel jittery. You wondered what he had done to make her look at him like that, but it didn't take you long to figure it out. Violence was suffocating them all. You didn't mean to go prying around in his private memories, but at the same time, you couldn't help it. You saw yourself in his eyes, and you wanted to know what had happened to him. You want to be a hero, right? That's cool. Tell me about your quirk. He looked to the floor. Yeah. I'm training to become one. I can control ice and fire because I got both mom and dad's quirks. That's awesome. Can you show me? 𝗧𝗪𝗧 felt a little awkward talking to someone who he thought could not see him. But despite that, he held out his hand and the entirety of it lit on fire, instantly bringing soft heat to brush your face. Wow, you whispered in a daze. You always loved fire. Then you turned your head towards him. I'm training to be a hero too. Really? His face lit up. Serious? You nodded fast and couldn't help but smile, as his excitement was weirdly contagious. Yeah. I'm training under 𝐒𝐭𝐴 or 𝗧𝗪𝗧. Wow. No way. Maybe we're gonna be heroes together then. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 felt oddly hyperactive and wired. You're my age, right? I'm 9, so yeah. Maybe we can go to the same school. He himself didn't quite understand where his extreme excitement just came from, but he was lit up by finally hanging out with someone his own age. And not only that, but you seem to have a lot in common. Without even really addressing it, the two of you had bonded over your mutual understanding of struggle. You both had immense troubles in the family realm, and you were both training to be heroes. You were the same age, same interests, and you both seemed to have a lot you didn't really want to talk about. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 had never felt so seen. And neither had you. His flames suddenly fell. What's your quirk? You pursed your lips. I guess it's called telepathy. Or telekinesis. Cosmic manipulation? I don't know, it's a lot of things. Whoa. Can you show me something? You glanced around the room. What should I do? What can you do? A lot. He looked around too, curious and excited. Can you, move things with your mind? A playful smirk tugged at the corner of your lips, and immediately the sheets ripped off 𝐒𝐻𝑖𝐻𝑜's bed, and the pillows followed it. You didn't move as they came to swirl around him over and over again, creating a gust of wind that pushed his bangs back. His eyes were bright and wide, and his smile was even bigger. His arms came up above his head as he watched the sheets twirl around him. Whoa. He laughed, and you let a giggle slip through, watching him enjoy himself. So cool. You think so? You asked. That was the moment when you realized that no kid your age had ever been allowed to know anything about your quirk. This was one of the first times you had shown it to anyone, for the sake of entertainment. And it was fun. You dismissed your smile and stopped the sheets from swirling. The blanket and 4 pillows all floated back over to his bed and straightened out on top of it, neatly tucking itself back into position under the mattress. That was awesome. 𝗏𝗏 laughed, and you liked the way it sounded. What else can you do? I can read your mind. You tilted your head cheekily. 𝐻𝐻. He started to jump up and down. Okay. What am I thinking? Go. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Cheeseburgers. 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 You laughed at him. Cheeseburgers. What? How'd you do that? His eyes opened, and he reached forward to grab your shoulders and started shaking you. How'd you know? Well, you laughed in between shakes. I told you. Mind reader. That must be so cool to be able to read anyone's mind whenever you want. I wish I could do that. He took a step back. No, you don't, you said half-heartedly. It's not as good as it seems. Trust me. And you could hear him thinking again, but it wasn't about cheeseburgers. Why/N? Yeah. You already knew where this was going. Please. He begged intensely. Can you please take off the blindfold? Can I please see your eyes? Your body language expressed defeat and got a little weaker as you looked across the room. You let out a deep sigh and turned back to him. Fine. You raised both hands up to your face and slowly dragged the blindfold up to your head, pulling your fringe back messily. You dropped your hands and blinked your eyes together before opening them. The light at first felt a little disorienting, and you glanced at him while waiting for them to focus. His expression switched from excitement to shock in a split second. And you had seen it coming. Whoa. He stepped closer to you and narrowed his eyes, getting a better look at all the dazzling shades of gold and amber that seemed to be glowing at him. They're beautiful. You blinked and looked away while shaking your head, but he couldn't stop looking at you. He was thinking that they were definitely the most beautiful eyes that he had ever seen. So you can see me now? He asked. Doesn't that feel better? Hey, do you like my hair? You looked back at him. I could see you before. With my quirk, remember? Right. That's hard to understand. And yes, I like your hair, you smiled. Do you dye it? Nope. I was born like this. Lucky, you said. It's cool. You're the lucky one. He threw his arms out wide. You got the prettiest eyes ever. I can't believe you like to cover them. That was when you started to feel a little self-conscious, and you remembered why you had made the choice to wear the blindfold in the first place. Absent-mindedly, you reached up to grab it. No, what? Don't put it back on. If your eyes work, why are you even covering them? You wouldn't understand. You started to pull it back down your face. I thought you would after I showed you, but apparently not. Panicked, he reached up and snatched it off of your head. No. Please. Just leave it off and we can play some games together. You don't have to cover them when you're here. Stop. Why? Why do you want to see my eyes that bad? Because I like looking at them. You spluttered for a moment and took a step back, blinking angrily. You didn't like this anymore. Just give it back. Come on, please. We can hang out like normal 𝗏𝗏. If you didn't already catch this, I'm not normal. You snapped back. If you want me to be normal, then we can't be friends. Without hesitating, you turned on your heel and marched towards the door with your fists clenched. No, wait. 𝐎𝐸𝐽 reached out to grab your arm, but his body was shoved back by a strong, invisible force, and he landed on his ass on the floor with a thud. Shocked, he propped up on his elbows and watched you open the door, leaving his room. He had sadness and hurt all over his face as you disappeared down the hall. And then, the blindfold ripped out of his hand and followed after you. You caught the blindfold over your head and slipped it back on, securing it at the back, while marching down the stairs. You followed the path that 𝐒𝐸𝐽's sister had led you down before, and you came out to the kitchen, happy to see her in an apron with her hair tied back. 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵. She spun around with flour on her face. Hey girl, what's up? I don't want to play with 𝐒𝐸𝐽 anymore. He won't stop touching my blindfold. She looked hurt by that. You could see that 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵 only ever wanted everyone to just get along, and it was all she had ever wished for. On shooting stars, birthday candles, and four-leaf clovers she found in the backyard, all she had ever wished for was peace. And it was unfortunate that she was the one carrying the weight of the family's problems herself. You felt sorry for her too. Maybe even more so than 𝗎𝐸𝐽. Oh really? She came over to you, too soft and kind for the world she was living in. I'm so sorry. 𝑦/N don't hate him for it, he has a lot going on right now. He's not entirely himself. You nodded solemnly. I don't hate him. I just don't want to play right now. That's okay too. She smiled warmly, turning around to show you the kitchen. I'm baking cookies right now, if you want to hang out with me instead. You want to help? You nodded very fast and took her hand. Yes, please. You had been progressing fast, like a butterfly breaking free of her cocoon early, denying the laws of nature and choosing to move with your own resolve. In the last 3 months, you had gone through and surpassed all the trials and training that would usually be worked through over a 2-year period. You were flying through the ranks, and your peers had been struggling to keep up with you. 𝐒𝐭 especially was constantly astonished by your progress and your ability to upgrade so quickly. The new techniques that you were honing in on helped you in regular life, too, which you demonstrated to him every day, and you were getting so good at controlling and fine-tuning some of the most impressive skills you'd ever learned. You had more craft and expertise than you ever thought possible. However, one thing that you just couldn't seem to gain any control over was your own emotions. Although you were switched off most days, kind of floating by and checking all the necessary boxes of life, you certainly didn't feel like you were living. You didn't enjoy food the same way you used to, or sunsets, or even drawing. Everything, even the hobbies that once lit up your world, had started to feel like chores when you made attempts at them. You rarely found any enjoyment in the daily life, especially since you didn't have any friends. 𝐒𝐭 had recognized your isolation from other kids your age pretty early on and tried to take you to places where you could socialize. Whenever he could manage to get some time off work, he'd bring you to carnivals or markets or playgrounds, anywhere where he thought you might find some people you'd want to befriend, but was disappointed when you kept your distance from them. But he didn't want to force you, especially when he himself found it hard to make new friends. He thought it would be a good idea to try on with some familiar faces too, so he brought you to hang out with 𝐒𝐸𝐽 2 or 3 more times. However, on those days spent locked up in the low-lit Todoroki residence, you made a point of avoiding him. And, of course, you didn't want 𝐒𝐸𝐽 to spot you running away from him, because you didn't want him to feel bad about what happened the last time. But still, you didn't have any interest in hanging out with him if it was going to mean you had to spend the entire time explaining and defending yourself. You preferred the peace and quiet of hanging out with 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵. And so, anytime 𝐒𝐸𝐽 inevitably came looking for you in the halls, you always found a way to disappear. There were 2 instances where you ran into 𝗎𝐸𝐽 outside of his home, and it was the same situation. The first time was a hero networking event where Hawks and Endeavor were requested to attend, and they brought along their young heroes in training to connect with others in the industry. You spotted 𝗎𝐸𝐽 across the room before he saw you, and you stood behind 𝐒𝐭's legs to hide. The second time was a renovation event at Endeavor's agency that you and 𝗎𝐸𝐽 both just happened to end up at. Both times you had a little bit of small talk with 𝗎𝐸𝐽 throughout the events, which mostly came from you feeling bad about his guilt. But even then, your conversations were short and forced. It was clear to 𝗎𝐸𝐽 that you didn't want much to do with him, and although it made him sad to lose someone he thought could be a good friend, he allowed space to grow between you. In the encounters with him, you often read his mind and heard him thinking things like, "Is now good to talk to her?" or "I wish she'd forgive me," or "I hope we can be heroes together." It wasn't easy, seeing his face and knowing you were the reason he was so disheartened. Though, you definitely weren't the only reason. 𝗧𝗏 had a lot going on at home too, and you could see his memories of his father, and the kind of things he was going through was bound to ruin the spirit of any normal kid. At all of the events in the last few months where you had seen each other in the past, his mood was completely ruined. He was always burdened by the fact that he couldn't approach you, especially since all he wanted to do was talk. You did your best at trying to enjoy yourself at the various events, shake the hands of the adults that 𝐒𝐭𝐲 was introducing you to, and eating the good food. You tried as hard as you could to enjoy yourself with the smaller things, despite everything going on. But 𝗧𝗏 was never happy, and you couldn't shake the feeling that it was your fault. You ready to go, kiddo? You pulled your cardigan over your shoulders and stared at yourself in the mirror, unsure if you were really a fan of the red dress that you wore. Although this was just a casual wedding of one of 𝐒𝐭𝐲's friends, you wanted to look nice. Adjusting the blindfold where it sat near your ears, you sent a message to 𝐒𝐭𝐲 from across the house. Yep, he heard in his head. He didn't even get startled by the voice in his head anymore, since he was forced to get used to your creative ways of communicating. He tugged on his suit blazer and shamelessly checked himself out in the mirror before heading out. You and him met in the lounge room. He complimented your outfit. You look so grown up, he had said. And you both headed outside where you got into a black escort car that was waiting for you. The ride wasn't very long, only about 30 minutes before you arrived at the ceremony. Walking up to it, you realized how much you liked the setup. It was set in a lush green park, surrounded by the thousands of beautiful sakura that bloomed just in time for the wedding. The altar was gorgeous, with seats set up in front of it that all had cherry blossom decor. There was a large mingling area with snack tables, a drink station, and even a smoking area. There were already upwards of 100 people there, and you started to cycle through the voices and thoughts of all of them, searching for people you might know. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 walked up to a group of his familiars, dapping them up as everyone welcomed him. He introduced you and you made sure to be polite. The bride seemed to be very fond of your dress, and she is a lovely, bubbly woman. You figured her fiancé was a lucky man, and as you were smiling up at the adults, that was when you caught the voice. I can't believe she's here. It was an inner monologue, and of course you knew who it was. You turned on your heel and spotted 𝗧𝗏 a few meters away, standing beside Fuyumi and some other older kids. I want to talk to her, he thought, biting his bottom lip in nervousness. No, I can't. She doesn't want to talk to me. You mustered up a smile and waved for him, although it was dull and sort of flat. He smiled back immediately and squeezed Fuyumi's hand to get her attention. She looked up and spotted you, her face lighting up at the sight. 𝗧𝗏𝗏. Hey. You waved a little harder this time, considering heading over there to talk to them, before 𝐒𝐭𝐲 called your name again. 𝗧𝗏𝗏, you want to come meet the groom? You nodded at him, understanding that it would be rude to decline that offer. And feeling almost embarrassed, you turned away from the Todorokis and walked back to the group where 𝐒𝐭𝐲 was. 𝗧𝗏 was standing alone now. You could tell that he was feeling very sorry for himself. Not only could you hear his thoughts, but you didn't even need to, since his feelings were painted all over his face. He was in a cute navy blue suit that brought out his handsomeness, but looked rather pitiful standing and sulking by himself at a ceremony that is supposed to be in high spirits. He wanted to come and talk to you, but was holding himself back out of respect. He wanted to apologize, although you thought that there was no need for it. You didn't feel like he had wronged you or done anything worthy of repentance, but you still didn't have any intentions of pursuing a friendship with him, since you knew how his brain worked much too well. And because you couldn't shake the feeling that you were partially responsible for his discomfort on a day like this, you decided to approach him to hopefully smooth things over. Hey, 𝗧𝗏. His face lit up and lost all of its sadness from just 2 seconds ago, and he turned his body to face you. 𝗧𝗏𝗏. You hi, how are you? You held your hands behind your back and smiled. I'm doing good, and you? It's a nice ceremony, isn't it? 𝗧𝗏 was thinking 1,000 times over in his head. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Just tell her I'm sorry. It is. Duh. You don't need to be sorry, 𝗧𝗏. I'm not mad at you. He looked up suddenly surprised and confused for a moment, before he smiled in understanding. I forgot you can read my mind. There's no secrets to be kept from me. You half-heartedly joked. But seriously, Stop worrying so much. But I really am sorry, you know. I pushed you too hard and it must have been annoying. He looked down to the grass in thought, but his eyes were wide with passion. I was just confused, and I wanted to understand. It's okay. I'm used to people not knowing how to handle me. You nodded slowly to show your care. And it's okay not to understand everything. To be honest, you still had no intentions of creating a deeper friendship with 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻. There was no anger or bitterness on your side. You just simply didn't see a friend when you looked at him. His alienation of you from your first meeting was a direct reminder of your upbringing and your suffocating past. Seeing the way he looked at you made you think of your parents, and you hated it. You would never be able to live with that constant reminder. You didn't have the strength. Maybe one day, but not today. But at the same time, you didn't want 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻 to know that he made you feel that way. It wasn't his fault, and he wasn't wrong for just being a curious kid. You would prefer to go on with him believing that nothing was wrong, so that there didn't need to be a problem between you. You could allow him to be ignorant about the situation, and it was probably better that way. Nobody gets hurt. We're probably going to be seeing more of each other, so let's be civil. You held your hand out stiffly in front of you. Sound good? He looked down at your hand and back up at you, smiling. Friends. Out of care for him, you nodded. Friends. You shook hands while he stared at your blindfold, and you stared back, although he couldn't see. Then, you broke away from each other and you pointed at the snack table that was finally not surrounded and guarded by adults. Everyone had moved over to the drink station, giving the kids full access to the amazing food selection. Pust, you pointed, whispering to 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻. What do you say we go infiltrate the jackpot? What does that mean? You smiled. Steal. Let's go steal some food. The childish wonder in his eyes liked to play hide and seek most days, but right then, as 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻 was offered the chance to hang out with you, he couldn't hide it. His eyes were wide and sparkling and filled with so much excitement that you were sure they were about to spill over. Yeah. You and him walked together and slipped right past the adults without being noticed, before you arrived at the food table. Wow. This selection. You took a big whiff through your nose, getting familiar with all the options. There were croissants and muffins, fruits, cheeses and meats, and about 500 different types of cakes. There were grapes and dips and finger food and just about anything your little heart could possibly desire. Holy crap. You reached for some grapes. Oh, that one looks good. He pointed up to the third layer of a metal snack stack, where there was some red velvet cake slices sitting at the top. But I can't reach it without climbing. 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻 stopped talking as a piece of the cake lifted from the presentation case and started to float down towards him, inevitably landing in his hands. Wow. He looked at you while you were still looking at the food. Thanks. You smiled as you reached your hand over and grabbed a caramel slice, taking a big bite without even thinking about it. The immediate sweetness melted in your mouth, and you tilted your head to the side in utmost enjoyment. 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻 started eating his velvet slice, and you could have sworn he was almost crying from happiness. I never get to eat this stuff. He grabbed a handful of Pocky sticks in his other hand. But sugar is so yummy. Right? It's so good. You chewed excitedly. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 gives me a sweet treat sometimes. I think I'll never get bored of it. I wish I could have sweets more often. He dragged on with a groan. But Dad says I need to be in the best shape I can. Maybe one day, but you're only an 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻. You cut yourself off as you heard somebody approaching behind you. You didn't need to turn around to see it was a tall boy with white hair, and he was suited up nice for the wedding. He had an agitated look on his face, and it was glaringly obvious that he didn't want to be there. He sighed a huff and raked his hand through his styled hair as he reached onto the table and grabbed a bunch of grapes and some apple slices. Careful eating that crap, 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻. You know what 𝗵𝘃𝗲 will do if he catches you. Because you already knew that this man was 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻's older brother, you found it weird that he was referring to his father by his hero name. But it didn't take you long to figure out why. Leave him alone. You butted in with a little more sarcasm than necessary. Let him be a kid for once. Huh. You again. Natsuo stared down at you, cocking his head slightly. He had seen you around the house a few times, having barely ever spoken to you, though he was curious as to why you were around. What's with that blindfold? You playing a game or something? Don't ask her that. 𝐎𝐸𝐻𝐻 jumped in, feeling overly defensive since he didn't want to blow his last chance with you. Natsuo looked offended and amused at the same time, shocked by his baby brother's attitude. Then, he shrugged his shoulders and turned to walk away. Whatever, weirdos. You and 𝐎𝐸𝐽 turned back to each other and giggled before continuing to shove as much food as possible into your faces. And the rest of the ceremony was nice. You and 𝐎𝐸𝐽 stayed side by side, and you also got to catch up with 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵, which was refreshing. You got lots of compliments on your dress, including from 𝐎𝐸𝐽, who said red might be his new favorite color. You called him silly and slapped his shoulder. Later on, as the actual wedding began and everybody had to take their seats, you and 𝐎𝐸𝐽 were forced to split up. You had to sit with Kigo, and 𝐎𝐸𝐽 with his father. He turned around to look at you every now and then, and you always smiled. At some point, Kigo caught you in the act and nudged you with his elbow. 𝐎𝐸𝐽's pretty cute, isn't he? Kigo whispered with a grin. You told him to shut up and looked away, remaining silent and not looking at 𝐎𝐸𝐽 for the rest of the ceremony. And when it was all over, Kigo had said all his goodbyes and paid his respects. He told you he'd be waiting in the car, and you went to find 𝐎𝐸𝐽. You didn't know why, but you had a strong feeling that this was going to be the last time you saw him for a while. It was an intuition in your gut that you had learned not to ignore. So that was what gave you a sour expression as you headed over to say goodbye to him. You walked up behind and tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention. I'm leaving now, 𝐎𝐸𝐽. He spun around and his shoulders dropped. Well, when can I see you again? Maybe never. Soon. Really? You smiled half-heartedly. Of course. Okay. He looked very pleased with that agreement and held out his hand in front of him for you to shake. See you soon, friend. Your heart felt vulnerable for the first time in a while. For so long, your heart had been black and cracked in a dark, rusty, metal cage, rotting alone. But it seemed that for the first time in a while, some sunlight was finally starting to seep through. Color was spreading. And that terrified you. You stepped forward and slapped 𝐎𝐸𝐽's hand away, before pulling him into a hug. His hands came around your back, and for a moment he was stiff and confused, with his hands floating awkwardly in the air. Then, he loosened and placed his hands down before he closed his eyes. Bye, 𝐎𝐸𝐽. Bye, 𝑦/N. You pulled away. Take care of yourself. Same to you. He said cheerfully, and he didn't quite understand why you looked so sad. You turned away and offered one last wave over your shoulder, before 𝐎𝐸𝐽 noticed a tear slip under your blindfold. He gasped. W8, 𝑦/N-. 𝐎𝐸𝐽, come on. Dad isn't gonna wait any longer. 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵 called out, looking frantic. 𝐎𝐸𝐽 hesitated, obviously distraught, and he watched you walk towards your car for a few more seconds, before he forced himself to head back to 𝗵𝘃𝗻𝐵. He'd just ask you what was wrong the next time he saw you. 7 years later. I'm home. Your voice echoed through the house, and it sounded like it belonged there now. It wasn't very long at all before you heard a response. It almost seemed like he was waiting for you. Welcome back. You kicked your shoes off at the door, and your backpack fell off your shoulders, floating through the air before it landed to hang off the edge of one of the kitchen chairs. You walked inside and noticed Kigo lounging on the couch, looking tired after a long day of hero work. He was slacked back with his feet hanging off the edge, and you couldn't see his face, but you could already tell that it was dirty. How was work? Kigo asked you. Fucked. Like usual. You walked into the center of the kitchen. You stood still in front of the bench, taking out your hair tie while the cupboards behind you swung open, and the fridge opened too, and a random tea bag floated through the air over to you. You rubbed your face with both hands, and slipped your fingers under your blindfold to rub your eyes. I seriously don't know why they won't just hire some other chefs. As if me, a 16-year-old girl, is somehow the best sushi chef they can get their hands on. It's stupid, really. Embarrassing. Hey, I don't want to hear any complaints, kiddo. Kigo suddenly sat up with a groan and looked over the spine of the couch, raising an eyebrow at you. I told you, you didn't have to get a job. I have plenty enough money to support you, and I'd rather you focus on your training rather than making sushi. You sassed him back. And what if my passion was making sushi? That would be a different story. You retorted. Well, luckily it's not. But they pay me well, and it's good to have something to think about other than training for once. It just sucks when I get so swarmed with orders that I have no choice but to use my quirk. You use your quirk at work? Kigo looked deeply shocked. Are you serious? You didn't move as the coffee mug, the milk jug, and a tea bag all levitated in the air around you, while the kettle was boiling behind. Yeah, I know it's seedy, but they put me in the head chef role because I can do a lot of things at once with my quirk, and we get super overwhelmed at lunch rush. But they do keep me out the back so no one can see me. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 that's illegal. To use your quirk in public, especially at a job when you don't have a license, that's very fucking illegal. You're not joking with me, are you? But I'm not doing anything bad. It's harmless. That's not my point. He looked serious. Breaking the law is never harmless. Alright. Look, I get it, okay? Understood. I plan to quit soon anyway. You rolled out your right shoulder that had been giving you some grief. Didn't you say I'll be going to that fancy school soon? Hawks sighed heavily and rested his arm on the spine of the couch, trying to force himself to relax. Yeah. You can't put that on the back burner, kid. It's gotta be your top priority once it starts. The last leg of your training is only just beginning, and you definitely won't have time to work a part-time job on top of all of the homework you're gonna have. The kettle of now boiling water came around you and milk poured itself into your cup at the same time as the milk, and you smiled down while watching it. I think you're underestimating my abilities, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He tilted his head sarcastically and grinned at your attitude. I told you I'd never make the mistake of doing that again. I'm just saying you won't have time for a job. You scoffed and picked up your tea mug as all of the items you just used floated back to their designated spots, and you brought the cup up to take your first sip. So what's the deal with you sending me to school anyway? I'm kinda surprised you want me to do something so normal after all this time. And won't I be old enough to go pro in a couple years? Yes, 3 years left. But you can't go pro without government-sanctioned training. And yeah, you had plenty of that over the last few years. That's why you'll get into the school through recommendation with no trouble, but it's not exactly a normal school. He replied. It's built to boost heroes into their careers. Your classmates will all be aiming for the same thing as you. Will they be as strong as me? You'll have to find that out for yourself, but you know what I've always said? It's never a good idea to underestimate someone. I'm sure you understand that. He smiled in understanding and cocked his head to the side cutely. But most importantly, I want you to have a proper graduation and a community around you. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 doubted that you'd ever come across anyone as strong as you. However, he also knew that there were plenty of people out there who would have quirks unique in ways that can rival you. He knew how strong you were better than anyone, but he didn't want you to live in the ignorance that you were unstoppable. In fact, the idea of that actually terrified him. He did his best to prepare you for the real world, in a way that would make your parents proud. Realistically, 𝗒𝐭𝐲 could have chosen to send you down the same route that he went, going straight from probationary youth training to being recruited by the Hero Public Safety Commission. He knew the agency would be happy to train you as one of their enforcers, and the secondary program wasn't bad by any means. But he desperately wanted you to spend some time around kids your own age, especially as you come into adolescence. He didn't want you to go insane. He knew that a good, healthy life needs balance, and so far, you hadn't gotten much of that. He wanted you to have fun and get in trouble and joke and laugh and eat good food. He wanted to give you one last chance to be a kid, like you always deserved. When do I start? In about a month. 𝗒𝐭𝐲 turned around and glanced out his huge window onto his balcony, thinking deeply about how you were going to fit in. Do you think you're ready? You sipped your tea. I think so. Honestly, there wasn't much you thought would be capable of challenging you, since you barely ever faced hardships in terms of power. But despite everything that had happened to you, you still had an open mind, and were willing to be wrong. You should try to make some new friends. 𝗒𝐭𝐲 scoffed. It's gotta be lame hanging out with an old geezer like me all the time. You offered a fake chuckle, and your mind flashed to 𝗧𝗪𝗼, your first ever friend. It was a shame that your relationship didn't get to last long. You hadn't seen him in 7 years. You thought it was strange, the way you were both walking the same path, striving towards a career in heroism. Your guardians worked together, spent lots of time in each other's space, yet you and 𝗧𝗪𝗼 never crossed paths again. Not that you made any effort to change that. 𝗒𝐭𝐲 always offered for you to come with him when he went to visit the Todoroki residence, but you always declined. Sure, you would have liked to see 𝗵𝗃𝗻𝗻, now that you were all grown up. And of course you didn't hate the idea of seeing 𝗧𝗪𝗼 again. But it just never happened. You were swamped with training and work, barely ever having time for yourself, let alone anyone else. The opportunity was there, but you figured that you were better off alone. You didn't hate the uniform. It was a little shorter than you would have preferred, especially since you had spent the last 10 years of your life dressing for comfort over style. The part of you that loved baggy jeans and sweatpants wasn't exactly used to dressing nice. You completely forget about the fact that you were supposed to wear a tie, as you had never worn one before. And you left the top buttons undone on your dress shirt, making the uniform look a little more casual. You opted to leave your hair out, but you brought a clip in your hoodie pocket. You chose to wear a hoodie instead of your blazer, but you brought it in your backpack for in-school hours. You didn't feel the need to wear makeup for many reasons, but the main one was that you had your blindfold to cover your eyes. Your hair was bouncy and soft around your shoulders, and you were wearing the incorrect socks, which you paid no mind to. Your fully charged phone was in your skirt pocket, and you were ready for the day. You weren't exactly nervous, so to speak. But you did have this unfamiliar anxiety bubbling up inside your gut. You hadn't had to do people in such a long time. Over the last decade, you had more freedom and alone time than any teenager could ever wish for. You spent so much time with yourself that you sometimes forgot that there were other kids even out there. You hadn't been forced to get to know new people, or to try to fit in or make friends in so long, and now you were starting to think that might have stunted your growth a little. You just hoped it wouldn't be awkward. You didn't have any interest in kissing ass to be liked, but you didn't want to burn bridges between your peers either. You were going to be spending the next 3 years with everyone that you were to meet today, and that was enough to make you feel a little queasy. But despite all that, you had a feeling that you could handle it. They were just some kids, after all. That was what you were telling yourself as you left the safety of your bedroom and headed out into the main lounge room. "Good morning, Miss High School." 𝐒𝐭𝐲 waved at you with a bustling, busy smile, flashing pearly white teeth. "The uniform suits you. Feeling all fancy." "Too fancy," you replied, referring to your polished black shoes. "This is embarrassing." Don't stress it. Uniforms are always kinda lame, but you'll be fine. No one can judge you on it since they'll be wearing the same thing. That's the best part." He chuckled to himself, looking back down at whatever he was doing at the bench. "Come sit. I made you breakfast." You shuffled over to sit on one of the stools, and you propped your elbows up on the bench. 𝗂𝐭𝐲 had made you eggs on toast with some bacon, since he knew scrambled eggs were a bit of a hyperfixation at the moment. You thanked him with a smile, and 𝗂𝐭𝐲 noticed a little excitement tucked into the corners of your grin as you looked down into your plate. He stared at you as you rubbed your hands together, and a knife and fork levitated into your grip. He realized then that he had probably never seen you with as much expression on your face as you had right now, despite the blindfold, but it made him want to cry. He was confident that this was the best option for you. So feeling accomplished and warm, he looked back down to where he was washing the dishes. "So first day. You nervous?" "Nah." You scooped some eggs into your mouth. "I am curious though. I get the feeling this won't be anything like what I'm used to." "I'm glad you know that. I was worried the lifestyle change would be too big of a shock, but you seem prepared for something new." "Of course. I'm always prepared." You joked. "I'm relieved to hear that." He mumbled, drifting off. "Now, I gotta remind you that I'm going to Kyushu for the week because my agency needs me. Are you going to be okay here on your own?" You rolled your eyes. "Do you even need to ask me that?" I know. You're a big girl now. I just wish I could be around for your first week of school. I've been a big girl since I was a very small girl. You don't have to worry about me." You replied with a full mouth. "If I need anything, I'll call." "Okay, good. I thought so. But keep in mind that even if you don't need anything, you can still call, you know? If you just want to chat, or tell me about your first day. I'd love to hear." You smiled up at him through the hair that had fallen in your face, and you tilted your head. "Sure, 𝗂𝐭𝐲. I'll call." He noticed the genuineness in your voice, and it made him happy. You could hear his thoughts, and you were almost offended by the fact that he was so worried about you. Because as far as you were concerned, worrying about you was a waste of energy. "Anyway, you better get moving if you don't want to be late. Do you want me to get a driver to take you?" "I have to fly in 10, so unfortunately I can't take you myself. But if you doubt, it's okay, I'll walk. There's enough time." He raised an eyebrow, looking suspicious. "Are you sure?" "Mitchum." You finished your toast and brushed your hands together. "Right. I do know how much you love your weird little walks. You must have some great music downloaded if you can enjoy walking as much as you do. You know how great my music is, I play it for you all the time. True. You are ahead of your time with that one. He chuckled, placing the last of the dishes into the drying rack. Alright. Well, you better get moving then. Don't want to be the one kid that's late on the first day. Yeah. You rolled off your stool and 𝐒𝐭𝐲 took your plate, placing it into the sink to wash. You sighed and headed to the bathroom to brush your teeth, which only took 2 minutes before you were back in the kitchen, feeling fresh and ready to go. You double-checked that you had everything, and walked over towards the front door, stepping into the gen can. You stood at the door and slipped your backpack on, turning around as 𝐒𝐭𝐲 walked over to you, his wings almost dragging on the ground behind him. He stood in front of you while he reached forward, slipping his fingers into the neck of your hoodie to straighten up the collar of your uniform beneath it. He tugged and had a proud smile on his lips as he adjusted it. You're gonna kill it, girl. Duh. You smiled honestly, too. This moment felt oddly substantial even for you. The emotions were thick in the air between you, though you didn't know why it was so overwhelming. And just know that no matter what happens, I am so proud of you. You had never heard him say anything with that much honest conviction. Not only was the genuineness shaking his voice, but his thoughts were completely riddled with proof. It was jarring to see him so emotional, although he was doing his best to hide it. And if you didn't know him so well, maybe you wouldn't be able to tell that he was about to cry. And then suddenly you were fighting back tears too. Thank you. He reached up and tucked the fabric of your blindfold over your ear, and then he nudged your shoulder playfully, trying to dismiss his overbearing emotions. Now get the hell out of here. You laughed at him and turned around. You reached over to open the door and stepped out into the hall. Love ya, kid. Good luck today. Love you too. You looked back over your shoulder and waved. And like hell I need luck. He laughed for a moment before the door clicked shut in front of him. And as soon as he was alone, he broke out in tears. You found your desk easier than you expected to, and although there was still 10 minutes until the official first class began, the room was bustling with energy. You could hear and feel that everyone was jittery and nervous, as people were. Introducing themselves to each other and trying to make friends with rapid haste. The kids were excited and nervous, and all kinds of thirsty to begin the next phase of life. You relaxed calmly into your chair and had absolutely no questions as to why nobody was approaching you. What's with the blindfold? Maybe that's her quirk. I wonder if she can see. Probably not. She's so quiet. She's sitting alone. I should go introduce myself. Wait, there's the girl from outside. 𝗬𝗧𝗪𝗧. You placed your hands up over your head and let out a big sigh. Of course you expected this kind of reaction, but you couldn't say you weren't disappointed. But at least they weren't saying it out loud. You spent the next 5 minutes focusing on the voices and thoughts of every student in the room, tracking through their memories like a movie to filter out their quirks and personalities. You were focusing hard as you sifted through hundreds of words and memories and put a power and backstory to just about every face. You learned a lot about everyone without ever saying a word to any of them. That's my seat. Move. You dropped your hands into your lap and tilted your head to look up at the person standing beside you. Bakugou Katsuki. Quirk. Explosion. He can make explosions from the palms of his hands using his nitroglycerin-like sweat. Quite strong firepower. He's an angry boy who always fights with his mother and likes spicy food. Biggest pet peeve is weak people. He is incredibly agitated right now because he just found out that his childhood best friend, who he thought of as a complete nerd, had ended up in the same class as him. He is embarrassed and offended, and in no kind of good mood. He thinks your blindfold is weird. You almost laughed as you stole the information from his brain. No, I don't think it is. Get up and move your fat ass before I fucking murder you. Wow, what a ray of sunshine. You are Bakugou, correct? 𝗧𝗪𝗏 came up behind Bakugou and gestured to the table behind you. Please withhold the profanities. That is a terrible look. Your table is right here. The seating chart is organized in alphabetical dash. Shut up, Four Eyes. This bitch is in my damn seat. Would it be morally amiss to use your quirk to strangle this kid right now? A new presence suddenly entered the room, one that radiated authority and power, as if it were his essence. Students, in your seats. Ah, your new teacher is a silkworm. Marvelous. 𝐈𝐧𝐿 show you to quirk, erasure. He can erase quirks if he can see a person, for as long as he can keep his eyes open and trained on them. His quirk doesn't work on mutation quirks, but for some it can disable the usage of them. He's a fairly pessimistic character, but extremely skilled fighter, and prefers to remain out of the limelight. Hygienic and irritable. Good mentor. You immediately became filled with glee by the idea of speaking to him at the earliest opportunity. You wanted to see how his erasure would work on you. Bakugou turned back down to face you at the sound of his teacher's voice, and if looks could kill, you'd surely be 5 feet under like yesterday. You raised an eyebrow at him as you read his mind, and then you learned that Bakugou was dangerously close to punching you. And honestly, you'd love to see him try. For some reason, he was extremely pissed off by your blindfold, and was eager to know if you could see through it or not. He thought that you were bound to be either a weakling or an idiot for thinking you could afford to hold yourself back if you ever wanted to come close to beating him. His ego didn't make much sense to you, but it was interesting learning about how he thinks so early on. Bakugou was going to throw a fast punch to see if you'd dodge, but he held himself back since he knew his teacher was watching. He'd find time later to assure himself. Begrudgingly, Bakugou pulled himself away and headed to his real seat, slumping down into it. He was embarrassed, but no one else could tell. To an onlooker, he just looked like his very normal angry. While poking around in his brain, you happened to learn a few new swear words that you didn't know about. Students, go get changed into your sports uniforms and meet me on the oval in exactly 15 minutes. You realized that your first test was beginning. You were standing with your hands in your pockets amongst your entire class, as 𝐈𝐧𝐿 explained a little about the tests to come. He mentioned in passing that Bakugou was the student that scored at the top of the practical exam, which shocked you to your core. You wondered how someone whose power could be so easily nullified or overcome was at the top of this class. How could this school have such a prestigious reputation when this kid was the best they could offer? You didn't bat an eye as Bakugou approached the podium and blasted his ball away with an explosion. You were a little taken aback by the size of his blast, but you were much less than impressed. The students around you reacted very differently to Bakugou's quirk, as they gasped and gawked and cheered, remaining utterly amazed. 𝐈𝐧𝐿 didn't like that. He thought that it showed their innate weakness, the fact that they were so amazed by something like that. So, he threatened to expel those that came last in the test. Everyone was suddenly overcome with terror, being caught off guard by the idea of being expelled on their first day. You knew he was bluffing, and you didn't even need your quirk to do so. You wondered how the others had fallen for it so easily. The next hour went by somewhat smoothly, and you participated in all of the exercises. You made a point of not going overboard with your demonstrations. You kept your moves humble. Like the 50-meter dash, for instance, you chose to run like normal while having a gentle invisible force push against your back and lift your feet to move you faster than the average person. You scored third in the class. And it wasn't long before the ball throw came up, and you observed how the students were using their powers diversely. You already knew all of their quirks before they did anything, but it was interesting watching how they chose to utilize them in different ways. The students were resourceful and creative, which was making you a little more fond of each of them. When it was Midoriya Izuku's turn to throw his ball, you learned about OFA. Then it was your turn for the throw. You were called upon and you stepped towards the throwing stand, only before 𝐈𝐧𝐿 brought his finger out towards you and beckoned your attention. Yeah. Get rid of the blindfold. I don't want you pitching at my head for a fashion statement. You stopped walking and slowly turned to face him, your hands still in your pockets. Wow. How unfortunate. Pardon. Maybe it was ignorant, but given your status, I honestly thought you'd have a little more dignity than that. Your head was facing him as you spoke, and the wind picked up your hair almost suggestively, as if the breeze wanted to help you prove your point. Making such bold assumptions about me can't be a positive demonstration of your aptitude, can it, 𝐈𝐧𝐿? Were you not made aware of my situation? His eyes thinned in concentration. The students were all completely speechless, watching the interaction unfold between you. None of them had approached you to talk yet, partly because the blindfold had put a wall of tension between you and the others. A few of them wanted to talk to you earlier on, but now, as you were speaking back to your teacher, with no lick of concern for yourself, They understood where that resistance had really come from. You had power seeping out of your pores, and it was impossible not to see and fear. That fact alone was enough to make everyone a little iffy about approaching you. Unknowing is often inherently scary. Your 𝗧𝗏/N. He deadpanned with the realization, looking uncomfortable. You could see him cycling through your student file in his head, and he suddenly came to remember you and your story. He tracked himself inward and crossed his arms. I apologize. Carry on. You nodded your head once and turned to walk back to your station. Catch this. Aizawa called out to you. You didn't look behind you to where the ball was coming from. You only held your hand over your head and caught it effortlessly. You then stood still, and everybody in the crowd waited in impatient silence, anticipating your throw. You were no stranger to the many eyes on you, and almost the entire class had been trying to work out what your quirk was this whole time, since it was less than obvious. You could hear their thoughts, and to say it was distracting was an immense understatement. The students only knew that there was this indescribable power in you that they couldn't see, nor understand, and it was unsettling. They were excited to see you put it to use, as much as they were nervous. You glanced down at the ball and held it out in front of you, balancing in the palm of your hand. Then, in a flash, the ball flew out of your hand at the speed of light, shattering the sound barrier and throwing waves of wind out over the field. Your hair flew in the pressurized current, but your body didn't move an inch, as your mind tracked after the ball in the distance, before it disappeared from everyone else's view. Waves of pressure pulled gasps from the class as they leaned forward to combat the pressure, covering their faces with their arms and squinting their eyes. Some of them struggled to remain standing. You paid them no mind, as you stood still as a rock, focusing hard on exactly where the ball was going. 7,826,000 meters away. Sydney, Australia. It took a few moments of silent concentration, as you had to keep controlling the direction, trajectory, and velocity of the ball meticulously. And then, when you were sure that it had landed somewhere off the Sydney coast, you turned back around to face your class and teacher. You knew you could have simply shot the ball up into space like the 𝗧𝗏𝗏 girl who had zero gravity, but that would put you in the same ranking as her. And what fun would that be? Aizawa was staring down at the reader like it was made of gold. Shocked and overwhelmed and almost in disbelief. He turned the device around to show the number, which was sitting at over 7 million meters, and continued to rise. The class let out a collective gasp, and then a few astounded screams. What the hell was that? That power. She didn't even move a muscle. You concealed a smirk, and lowered your head before tucking your hands away again and walked back towards the class. You must admit, you were enjoying cycling through the unspoken words of all your classmates. Everyone was making such silly comments, though none of them had the balls to say the stuff out loud. It was surprisingly refreshing to just be around some teenage sass. And it was nice. Who the fuck is that? A new voice came in suddenly, and it took all of your attention in an instant. Your brain ticked over to the new voice, and it stuck out to you because it was not new at all. It was actually very, very familiar. You froze in front of the class as they stared at you in confusion, and you quickly scanned through everyone with your hands now out of your pockets, until you finally located the voice you had just heard. 𝗧𝗏. 1,000 thoughts flew by as you were shown memories of his training, his family, his bedroom, his exams, your first meeting, his favorite food. All of it came flooding in all at once, enough to drown out your resolve. As quickly as you could in the panicked state, you tried to look for answers as to how the hell Todoroki 𝗧𝗏 was in the same class as you. But the biggest question you had was how you hadn't noticed him yet. You had been in the same vicinity for almost 2 hours, and you hadn't heard or seen him. That sounded less than likely. Not only did his two-tone hair stick out like a sore thumb, but everything about him was so familiar to you. It just didn't make sense that you had missed him, unless he was completely void of thoughts the entire time. 𝗧𝗏 was staring at you through the crowd. Can you hear me? He thought to himself. Yes. He heard your response immediately, and his heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard that voice in so long. Do you remember me? His eyes were sparkling, and he wished he could see if yours were doing the same. Of course. He almost started to cry. What are you doing? Don't just stand there, get back in line. Aizawa snapped. You turned to look at him and then shook your head down, pulling yourself together, and then you walked back to the students. You stood in front of them and turned your body away, looking back out to the teacher. 𝐎𝐻𝐸 stared at the back of your head, completely speechless. "We'll talk after," he heard in his mind. At the sound of that, he couldn't help but smile. He lowered his head so that no one else could see. He couldn't believe it. Aizawa-sensei, can I have a word? Class had officially ended and the students had all cleared off the field, moving on, while you chose to stay behind. You waited until everyone else was gone, before you approached your teacher. "Don't you have another class to get to?" You shook your head. "It's lunch." "This is supposed to be my lunch too, brat," he thought to himself, staring down at you. And then he closed his eyes in defeat. "Who am I kidding? Relax, 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐬𝐬𝑅𝑎. What do you need?" "I was wondering if you'd be willing to try using your quirk on me. You know, to see if you can erase my quirk." "Why? Can you explain your quirk to me?" His interest piqued. "Well, I don't know how else to explain it other than saying telepathy and telekinesis. Though, there seems to be a lot of levels to it and it's a pretty overbearing power." You had your right hand resting in your pocket, and you grabbed a lighter sitting in there to nervously flick it. "You see, since my quirk first manifested, I've never been able to get away from it. I can't turn it off. And so, I guess I was just curious to see what it would feel like to not have it for once." Aizawa took your words and got lost deep in thought as he watched you talk. He tried to recall all the excessive details of your case. And then suddenly, without warning, the hair around his head and his scarf started to float, and his eyes turned a terrifying glowing red. Silence fell. It almost pulled the air right out of your lungs, and your mouth fell open. It shocked you to your core, the way the silence came out of nowhere and started to crush you. You couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. There were hundreds of thousands of things that you could always hear that you had just learned to tune out. A part of your focus was always going to be trained on blocking out unwanted traffic. Sounds, thoughts, screams. All sorts of noises were always crowding your head, creating chaos and starting fires. And at that moment, it all stopped. A crazed laugh bubbled up from your chest and your spine hunched over a little. "Oh my God. Oh my fucking God. You never." Knew silence could be so suffocating and so liberating at the same time. It was all gone. Suddenly, for the first time in way too long, you were alone in your head. There was only you upstairs, and that was a privacy you wished you had the privilege of access to more often. You felt like you were alone in a big white void and you could only see, hear, and speak to yourself. You didn't have to dodge screams or ignore prayers. You could sit down in silence and not think about anything. You could stare at a blank wall and smile because it wasn't trying to talk back to you. Everything had stopped, and you wished it could last forever. You wanted this glorious nothingness to last for the rest of your life. Why are you crying? Does it hurt? What? You half snapped out of your trance, looking up, and you touched your cheek below where your blindfold sat, to feel it was indeed wet. "Oh, no, it doesn't." "Explain what you're feeling." Your head was pointed towards the floor, and you were at a complete loss for words. "I can't. It's just so amazing. It feels good. Having your quirk taken away feels good." Your breath was shaky. "Yeah. It might seem weird, but my quirk hasn't always been my friend. Sometimes it feels like it's working against me, and I've never had this kind of break from it before. It feels like I'm breathing for the first time." You talk as if your quirk is sentient. "Sometimes it seems like it is." He shook his head. "Your quirk is an extension of you. If you cannot control it, it will work the other way against you. And if you really feel this much relief having your quirk taken away, then your main focus in this school should be to learn how to live in harmony with it. Otherwise, you will never find peace." I know that. I'm just surprised that I like it so much." Aizawa took a long pause to watch you. And for the first time since you met him, you had absolutely no idea what he was thinking. Although, you could make assumptions based on what was written on his face. "So you're a mind reader?" You nodded in response, subconsciously bringing your hand to touch your right temple. You couldn't believe how unshackled you felt right now. "And you can move objects with your mind too?" "Yeah." You brought your hand down. Aizawa's eyes were starting to sting. "Can you do that now? Are both halves of your quirk disarmed?" Good question." You brought your focus in, and a few tiny muscles in the side of your face twitched with the attention change. You felt your answer instantaneously, as a bunch of small rocks hidden in the grass beneath you floated up, all coming to levitate around your bodies. 𝐒𝐻𝐽 didn't look away from you, but could clearly see all the rocks in his peripherals. So, I can't get rid of all your power. He disarmed his quirk and started to rub his aching eyes. You hummed for a moment as the voices came back, louder than ever. Guess not. You had almost joined back up with the rest of your class when you were walking through the quiet halls alone. Your attention was elsewhere since you were subconsciously sifting through the crowds ahead, searching for 𝗬𝗪's voice. Your head was pointed down and your arms were swaying, as you soon found him to be about 5 minutes ahead of you, at the cafeteria with 𝗬𝗪. They were having a light-hearted, one-sided conversation that 𝗬𝗪 was only entertaining to be polite, but on the inside, was really wanting to come and find you. Suddenly in that moment, you caught a presence approaching you from behind that had been hidden around a corner. You had noticed it as you were coming down the hall, but you paid it no mind up until this point. Bakugou reached for you, grabbing your bag to stop you from moving. Your backpack zipper ripped open and all of your papers flew out. You turned around and flattened your hand towards the books and paper, and they all froze in place before slowly floating back up into a neat pile in your arms. You collected them together and slowly raised your head to find the boy who had sneak attacked you from behind. That was unnecessary. You stared blankly at Bakugou. If you wanted to speak to me, you could have asked. He could see no expression through your blindfold, which only pissed him off more. What the hell were you talking with the teacher about just then? Bakugou snapped, paying no mind to the fact that he had just broken your favorite backpack. And don't even try to deny it. I saw you sneaking around. Why do you want to know? You asked while searching his mind for answers. Bakugou didn't want you to get any special privileges, and he wanted to know the details of your quirk as means to gauge your current ability level. He wanted to make sure that you were still below him, since your power from the ball throw caught him off guard before. He had originally pinned you for a weakling, so now you had harnessed his attention. I want you to tell me what the hell your quirk is exactly. You blinked slowly. It's mind reading. It wasn't technically a lie, but you didn't owe Bakugou the whole truth. Bullshit. That's a load of crap. I saw you out there with the fucking ball, so don't lie. He grabbed your bicep with an iron grip. I fucking hate liars. You remained calm. Let go of me. He was very impatient and irritable. I don't want a shitty entitled brat like you sneaking around my school pretending to be hot shit. So tell me how the hell you did that. Your head slowly pointed down to where Bakugou's hand was clamped around you, and in the very next second, his body was blasted with the force of a freight train, and he was thrown backwards. He landed on his back about 7 meters down the hall, and he rolled over, coughing and groaning in agony. The wind had been knocked out of his lungs. You remained standing where you were without moving a muscle, and you took the opportunity to make yourself known to your new classmate. I understand your curiosity of me, but it ends here. I'll save you some time and make this very clear for you right now, so there's no room for questions in the future. Your voice was proud and strong, and it echoed down the otherwise empty hall, and Bakugou forced himself up onto his elbows. He thought he might have a few broken ribs, and he wanted to break your nose with his foot. What the hell was that force? That couldn't be her. The others said she just reads minds. The expression on his face was a beautiful mixture of shock and fear, as he tried to work out what the hell had just hit him with all that power. He waited for your next words. There is no reality where you will ever be able to beat me. Bakugou blinked, unsure if he was imagining this. His throat felt choked up. So don't waste your time trying. You turned around to continue down the hall in the direction of the cafeteria, and you held your loose papers close to your chest. When you were almost out of sight, Bakugou finally started to register what had just happened, and he spluttered out some desperate gibberish like, "Get back here," before he tried to stand to his feet. You didn't even look back as you used your power to swipe out his hands from under him, and you knocked him back down to the floor again. 𝗬𝗪. 𝗬𝗪 spun around with a haste that actually surprised you. His hair caught the breeze of the movement, and for a very small moment, it created a tiny dual-colored halo around his head. His eyes came down to land on you, and his normally neutral face was soon riddled with unreserved excitement. His voice was breathy. He was overwhelmed and didn't know what to say. He had been thinking of the perfect thing to say to you for 2 hours, reflecting on the last 7 years, and he was sure he had a solid leading line. Something remarkable. But now that you were actually standing in front of him, his words had abandoned him. He was all alone. "Do you want to go somewhere and talk?" you asked. He spluttered before clearing his throat and stiffening his body. "Sure." You turned around. "Follow me." You lead 𝗧𝗪 through the halls, without talking another word, and he followed right behind you, staring at your broken backpack. He was happy being lead wherever you were going and didn't want to ask questions about that, but he was curious as to how you had snapped the zipper of your bag. He kept his thoughts to himself, although you already invaded them anyway, and he held his mouth shut. It was only about 4 minutes later that you reached the top of a staircase and pushed open a metal door that led to the massive open roof of the UA building. A gust of wind welcomed you both, and you had a calm smile on your face as you walked out onto it, coming into the sun, and you found a seat on the floor with your back pressed up against an electrical box. You brought your knees to your chest and tapped the ground beside you when you hear 𝗧𝗪 thinking about where he should sit. Somewhat nervously, he sat down crisscross beside you and placed his bag off to the side. He looked straight ahead at the beautiful horizon and tried to think of what to say. He had so many thoughts that he couldn't make sense of, and miraculously, your brain seemed more peaceful than his for once. "So, it's been a long time." You broke the silence. 𝗧𝗪 swallowed thickly. He was anxious about navigating this conversation, but he also wanted it to be natural so you could both have the space to be honest. "It has. About 7 years, right? You been counting?" You joked in an attempt to soothe his nerves that were pouring out of him. "And no, well, I suppose. That was the last time I saw you, and I know. I'm just joking." You smiled, and it calmed him immediately. "How have you been?" He took a deep breath, and it seemed that he was pulling himself together well. He placed his hands on his knees. "Nothing much has changed in my world." You continued to look straight ahead, and a frown threatened your lips as you recalled back to the last time you had hung out with 𝗧𝗪. His family life was in violent shambles, and he was neglected and scrutinized all at once. He had every reason to go absolutely insane, but had held it together, even after all these years. You thought of his father, you wondered where his mother was now, and you briefly prayed that Fuyumi and Natsuo were doing well. "I'm sorry to hear that." He shook his head. "No, I have no complaints. I think that I'm incredibly lucky to have been recommended to such a prestigious school." "You got in through recommendations?" "Me too." "That's not surprising." He nodded slowly and understanding. "Your guardian is 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗃, correct? Was he who recommended you?" "Yeah." You let off a nervous chuckle. "I guess he saw something in me back then. And I'm pretty lucky he was willing to put in the effort to guide me, because he didn't have any interest in training the next generation. But I guess he took a liking to me. How could he not?" 𝗧𝗪 remarked shamelessly. "I've always thought about your quirk and how diverse the possibilities of it are. Says you, Frostburn." You nudged him with your elbow playfully. "You've got to be ranked pretty high too, right?" He stared straight ahead and his face looked soft, as he was lost in contemplation. "Yes. You and I will remain at the top of the charts." "I'm sure of it." You laughed at his familiar awkwardness, and relaxed back against the box again. You sighed, and looked up at the scattered clouds in the sky. One of them looked like a skateboard, which was your father's favorite hobby when he was a teenager. You were smiling. "Look at us." Life was starting to feel different for you. You were experiencing so many things about adolescence for the first time, and you couldn't even deny how much it was exciting you, sweltering your heart. "I can't believe we ended up here together." You mumbled. "We joked about it back then, but to think that it actually happened? It's a miracle." 𝗧𝗪 seemed to be on the exact same wavelength as you. There was no question if it was awkward to talk in dramatics, or to be overly reminiscent of the past. You were both just existing beside each other and seemed to be doing it in a similar way. "You know, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see you again." 𝗧𝗪 sounded disheartened as he spoke. "But we have an interesting past, so maybe this is fate at work, bringing us together here. I always enjoyed your companionship as a child, so I think we'd still get along now, considering everything that we have in common. I'm sure we will get along great." You nodded. "And I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I know I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I let the opportunity slip away again." He started talking a lot faster, as if he was trying to word vomit everything out before it got stuck in his throat. But I need you to know that I am sorry for how I treated you when we first met. You turned to him and your eyes softened. Shota, I treated you like a spectacle for my entertainment. Like a zoo animal. Just because I couldn't understand something about you, I tried to force an explanation out of you. I shouldn't have pushed you so hard, but I was just ignorant. And I have learned that lesson now. I just needed you to know that it'll never happen that way again. Shota, listen. You said firmly, shifting your hips slightly. You really don't have to apologize. Everything that happened that day made perfect sense and was completely natural on both sides. I wore this weird-ass blindfold, which is going to be weird for anyone to get used to, let alone a kid. Of course you were curious, and there was nothing wrong with that. I was just so sensitive back then, especially around that topic. Everything was so red-hot and I hadn't healed my wounds. I hated being reminded of my parents, and every time I had to explain the blindfold thing, I had to think about them. It just hurt so bad. I didn't know how to handle my pain, and I was so reactive because of it. The sun was warm on your skin, and the breeze was mellowing out the heat. The elements had come together in perfect harmony to create the most comfort for you and 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 to sit with each other. You took a deep sigh, and 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 decided to keep on listening. I overreacted. I know that. But I also don't blame or shame myself for that. I was just a little girl doing her best with what she had, and sometimes she lost the plot. I might not behave the same way or even be the same person I was back then, but I still have love and kindness for her. She's just me before I grew into myself. And I think you should have that same grace for yourself, 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏. Because if you live your wild life looking back, you'll miss all the beauty right in front of you. I don't want either of us to live that way. You had seamlessly and intentionally drifted away from the topic of your first meeting. Now, you were trying to hammer some inspiration into him. There had been a cloud of darkness following 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 around since you'd first seen him, and you liked the idea of washing it away or lightening his load a little. You were observant enough to know that not many people could have the same influence that you did on 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏. It's good to reflect on where you went wrong, but wallowing in all the bad things that you've done or what's happened to you, that's not going to get you anywhere. Life does not stop and wait for you to get over it. Take the time you need to rest and heal, and when the time comes, you pull yourself back together. You turned your head and pursed your lips for a moment. Because believe me when I say that no one else will do it for you. You stared at each other for a while, and he analyzed your blindfold with a type of shock on his face that was normally reserved for remarkable epiphanies. Thank you, Y/N. He let out a shaky breath. Thank you for saying that. You smiled again. I want us both to be happy, so I'm just letting you know what has worked for me recently. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I feel so lucky to have crossed paths with you again. 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 wanted to hug you. I think it will be great having each other through this next phase of life. He turned his body to face you, and he looked much more composed than before. Calm. Collected. He looked completely and utterly satisfied. Without thinking too hard into it, he held out his hand in front of you for a shake. And for a moment, you were taken right back to when you were kids. Friends? He asked. You quickly grabbed his hand, and as soon as your palms connected, you used your quirk to show him a beautiful montage of some of your memories with him. 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 gasped as he saw an image of you and him as kids giggling under the falling cherry blossoms, eating delicious cakes and hiding from the adults. Then he saw the look on his own face from when you had first shown him your quirk, and you made the bedsheets fly around him like a tornado. 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 had forgotten that he was capable of expressing that much authentic happiness on his face. The memories that you showed startled him at first, but then they settled and calmed down to sit warmly wrapped around his heart. The memories stopped and he looked back at you, with a single tear in his left eye. 𝐬𝐻𝗧𝗏 was asking you to be his friend, and after all the careful consideration over the last few minutes, you were confident that you'd be betraying your own heart if you declined. Back then, your answer would definitely be a no. But you had no room in your life for extra attention anyway. You had no emotions to spare. You couldn't afford the drama that a friendship guarantees, so you stayed away from them altogether. You almost had no choice. You had to take the time to heal. And now, as you'd been marinating in your pain for almost a decade, it was starting to feel different. You were almost bored of it. Living with it all on your chest for so long had made it much easier to bear. It was almost as if you had gotten used to how all the trauma felt inside you. And so now that the opportunity to try something new was in front of you, smiling like there isn't a single thing wrong in the world, you found yourself to be quite fond of the idea. You could use a friend. You had a proud smile on your lips, and your hands were still locked in a firm shake. Friends. Someone had caught your attention. Midoriya Izuku. It didn't happen very often that people were able to pique your interest in the way that he had. However, while sitting in English literature, you were tapping your pen on the table rhythmically and staring intently at the back of Midoriya's head. Your attention was pointed at his soft green curls, but your mind was busy trying to dig around inside of his head. You had noticed something weird about him from the first day of quirk testing, when you learned that he had inherited his quirk from the current #1 hero, All Might. That in itself was obviously bizarre, but something about Midoriya had been chipping away at your brain, anticipating your attention. You hadn't been able to work it out. But, as you bit your bottom lip, you felt yourself getting closer to elation. You cycled through hundreds of memories and details about his quirk, and then you felt this odd pulling sensation, which was nothing like anything you had felt in other people's minds before. A power outside of Midoriya, but residing inside him. Had he been possessed? No. You couldn't feel any malice. It felt like a strong force that was actively challenging you and quickly taking control of the situation. And then, boom. Your vision changed and you were suddenly in an endless black void. The classroom was gone. You could barely breathe, and you could immediately feel the lack of control that you had in this dimension, which startled you. Your blindfold was gone. Your body was bound still, your arms by your sides, and you had a thick black fog covering all of you, all the way up to your mouth. You were surrounded in endless black and twinkling stars. You couldn't move and you were lying on your stomach, as you looked up in front of you and you saw 8 thrones with people on them, sitting and staring at you in the floor. They didn't look pleased to see you, with confusion being the main expression that they all shared. You had no idea what this was. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "She can't talk here yet, Yoi." At the mention of that, you looked down at your own nose where you could see some of the fog, and then you cinched your eyebrows in concentration before all of the blackness around you miraculously turned translucent and soon disappeared completely. Feel antsy. You stood to your feet and wiped off the front of your uniform, glancing up at 8 red thrones, each topped with an owner. There was one throne in the center that had a strange, yellow, glowing aura. You weren't sure why, but it felt very familiar. One thing you immediately noticed about them was that you couldn't read any of their minds. When you tried, you were met with nothing reactive. Complete radio silence. It is as if these people were figments of your imagination. Or maybe they were dead. Or maybe they were never even alive. You had no answers. How did you do that? A tall man with what looked to be a lightning strike over his eye pointed to where you had just been lying on the floor. How did you break free? You glanced down at your hands and clenched them together a few times, feeling dizzy and dangerously confused. I honestly have no idea. You looked back up at them all and felt incredibly intimidated by the energy radiating out of them. You could tell that these people, whoever they were connected by something much thicker than blood. They were a unit, a force to be reckoned with, and one that was endlessly stronger than the eye could see. You were at their complete scrutiny. You were already pretty confident that you'd have no chance facing off against these people if it came down to that, especially not if they were working together. It seemed as though you were intruding on their world, so you needed to make it known that you had no intentions of fighting or harming them. I'm just gonna say that I have no idea what's happening, but you should all know that I come in peace. A buff, bald man leaned forward in his chair. How did you get here? I'm really not sure. You glanced behind you and stared off into the endless black void, thinking about what had happened and how. I was in school, looking at... Your voice trailed off as you started to put the pieces together. The only woman of the group stood to her feet. And while she looked intimidating, she felt oddly safe. Do you know Midoriya Izuku? I do. Fuck, I knew it was him. You nodded and made eye contact with her. Listen, I'm a telepath, and I'm in Midoriya's class. I was reading his thoughts to try and figure out his quirk, and I got pulled through some kind of gate, and it spat me out here. Everyone was silent for a moment. You wished you knew what they were thinking. If that is really true, then this is indeed a very bizarre situation. It's possible that it could have been a coincidence that you ended up here, if your quirk is strong enough to transcend dimensions. The skill of a strong clairvoyant is boundless. The woman spoke and glanced around at her comrades, clearly pondering the possibilities. She glanced back at you and looked more serious. You are currently in the realm built to house the One for all power, and it is not accessible to anyone who isn't connected. You should be aware of this power already if you really are psychic. We are all the past users of the power that has since been passed on to your classmate. This is our realm. You narrowed your eyes. Should you be telling all that to just anyone that comes in here? It all felt very exclusive, like it was absolutely supposed to be kept a secret, so you felt weirded out by the fact that she told you that information so freely and unprovoked. It was also making you very uneasy that you couldn't tell what any of these people were thinking. The woman placed her hand onto her hip. It's not just anyone that comes in here, dear. You blinked. Touché. Now, I'm really not sure what led us to this point, as this is very unexpected if it truly did happen unprovoked. I think it is possible that your power could have been recognized as an invasive threat, and One for All acted on its own to try and trap you. If that is the case, we can free you. But I think it's important that you understand that this information mustn't be dashed. Believe me, I have no intentions of relaying any of this to anyone. When you can read minds, you get very good at keeping shit to yourself. You interrupted and held out a persuasive hand as you talked. I won't even tell Midoriya that I'm aware of this place. Don't worry. Midoriya is also unaware of this place, but not for long. This lineage is a strange, sentient thing. You tilted your head. Interesting. Listen. You shouldn't be here. We don't know why you're here, but you need to go. So we're going to send you back now, and please don't fight what happens next, the woman said, taking one step forward. And just know that this power has been passed down for generations, and is crafted for a very specific purpose. This kind of law cannot be taken lightly, and if I could explain the gravity of this to you with the time that I had, I would. But I don't think it's safe for you to remain here. Trust me, I'm gonna stay the hell out of Midoriya's head from now on. You don't have to worry about me. My lips are sealed. And since you guys are all weird and mystical, I'm sure you'd be able to sense if I was lying or had any ill intent. You glanced around at the group who were all staring straight at you. I just got curious about his quirk because it was not like anything I'd seen, and that's how I got here. Okay? I understand. We apologize for the confusion, but you really should be going now. The woman stood in front of you and held up her hand in front of your face. Goodbye. You nodded in understanding. Bye. You waited to see what was going to happen next, and it seemed like everything in front of you was melting back into the black void until there was nothing left, and then you had a fast tunnel-like feeling washing over you very quickly as you shot back to your reality. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. You jumped and your eyebrows shot up your forehead with shock as you stared at your teacher who looked appalled. He was slapping his podium with a book to make some noise. He had been trying to pull you out of your trance for 2 whole minutes. Your head turned back to Midoriya, who had now turned around and was staring at you very inquisitively. He was clearly trying to read your face and figure out why you had just been staring at him like that. The whole class was staring too, and they weren't even trying to be discreet about it. You weren't taking a nap under that blindfold, were you? I hope you're not stupid enough to think you'd get away with that. You cleared your throat and looked down at your book, pulling your chair in under you with your feet. And no, sir. Your name is 𝗧𝗏, right? You glanced up and Midoriya was standing right beside your desk. It almost felt like fate that he had ended up here, and you saw his approach coming hours ago. It is. It's nice to officially meet you, 𝗧𝗏-san. My name is Midoriya 𝗧𝗏, he said humbly, as if you didn't already know more about him than he perhaps knew about himself. He smiled and was clutching a book that said, Hero Analysis, close to his chest. I was wondering if I could talk to you really quick, about your quirk. My quirk? Why? Well, I take a lot of enjoyment out of learning about new quirks that are unfamiliar to me. It's sort of like a hobby. And I must say, I've never heard of anyone having a quirk like yours, and I'm honestly really intrigued to know more about it. He looked around the area nervously as he spoke, struggling to hold eye contact. But if you'd like to keep the details to yourself, I totally understand. I also just wanted to introduce myself, since we're classmates and all. You were understandably skeptical about reading Midoriya's mind at this stage, but you were also confident that if you just didn't go digging around deep and remained on the surface, then you shouldn't be brought back to the bizarre dimension from before. So, when you read his mind to figure out his intentions in questioning you, you come to the realization that he was innocent and wholly above corruption. He was just an overly curious and eager kid who had always loved heroes and became excited by learning about different quirks. Of course, he'd be curious about you. And what kind of hero would you turn out to be if you couldn't even entertain a fellow classmate in his passionate endeavors? All right. You stood up and threw your backpack over one shoulder. Walk and talk. He smiled so wide it probably hurt his face. Sure. Thank you. Midoriya followed suit behind you as you left the classroom a few minutes behind the rest of the class, and you headed out into the hall. You started to walk towards the cafeteria as he came up beside you, and you prepared yourself for the onslaught that you knew was coming your way. You took in a deep breath. Okay, hit me with the questions. Okay, great. So, firstly, I was curious about why you wear a blindfold to cover your eyes. Of course, you don't have to answer, but is there something wrong with them? Does something bad happen when your eyes are open? Is it at all related to your quirk? And if so, how? Damn. Rapid fire. You scoffed quietly, amused by his excitement. You didn't mind entertaining his curiosity. When I don't use the blindfold, my brain can get overloaded with all the information it's receiving, and I can lose my sense of what's real. He nodded quickly in understanding. Oh, is that right? Interesting. So, what is it that you can see when your eyes are open? Something supernatural? X-ray vision? I assume you see more than the average person, and your quirk must have something to do with that, right? His eyes were sparkling at you. Yeah, it's my quirk, but I gotta use analogies to explain it, so listen close. You smiled at him. Try to imagine I'm at a football game. If I wear the blindfold, I can use my quirk senses to watch the game, and it's a lot easier to stay focused on what's happening. However, if it's off and my attention is tuned into seeing what my eyes see, then I'm guaranteed to hear the thoughts of people around me, even on accident. That happens because I'm neglecting the action of refining my listening, and so it does its own thing. And in that circumstance, I could maybe hear someone around me thinking like, oh, I hope that player doesn't break his leg, and my foresight can get mixed up with what I'm seeing and hearing, since both are so elaborate, and I wouldn't be able to tell which was real, if the player broke his leg or not. Midoriya was holding his notepad and scribbling dangerously fast as you talked. Without focus, my quirk fails to refine what's important to me. It acts on its own. So covering my eyes, I get to search for the information I need to see, hear, and stuff like that with purpose. I can cut out unnecessary traffic that is only going to confuse me. But, strangely enough, sometimes the alternative, having the blindfold off, can work in my favor during fights. How so? He practically barked. Well, if I have it off, I don't need to focus any attention on seeing, so I have extra space in my brain to sense the thoughts of everyone around me. I have more bandwidth for information, since my eyes can see for me. It's sort of like training with ankle weights. When you take them off, you're stronger than you thought. But that would only work in high-intensity situations, or times of desperate need, though. If I wasn't feeling stress and pressure, it wouldn't work. But in that state, I can develop a foresight for the fights and predict others' movements pretty perfectly. Like you're able to sense danger? Sort of. Wow. This is amazing. That must give you such an advantage in fights. So in everyday life, being able to see gives you too much to focus on. But when you're fighting, it actually helps you predict what's happening. That's so interesting. He was walking very fast, and you could hear his brain miraculously moving faster than his mouth, if that was even possible. So, about your quirk? I have telepathy and telekinesis. You said simply, and he was quick to jump back into his tsunami of questions. Wow. Telekinesis. That's the psychic ability to influence a physical system without physical interaction. That must be one hell of an advantage. Have you studied quantum mechanics? What about Newton's third law? Is it not applicable? Is there push and pull in the physics like the laws of motion state, or does an object's momentum have no impact on your control of it? You stared at him and almost laughed in amusement. I don't think the laws of motion are applicable. My quirk sort of denies them. He nodded very fast and tapped his pen to his chin. And telepathy is just as impressive all on its own. The ability to access someone's mind against their will. And extrasensory perception has endless abilities, which must heighten your sentience so much. Can you communicate with people in their own minds? Like without their permission? Midoriya heard the words, of course. What kind of telepath would I be if I couldn't? In your voice inside his head, and he almost exploded with excitement. Oh my all might. So, with that logic, can you also control minds? Can your power influence someone to do something, and would it be able to overcome their will, no matter how strong? Is it possible in your understanding to somehow bypass your power? What would someone have to do to deny your mind control attempts against them? Smart kid. I haven't met anyone that can combat my mind control yet, but you never know. Typically, once I'm inside someone's head with the intention of taking control, I already have it. I cannot influence free will or change someone's mind indefinitely, but I can get inside and block their will from sending orders to their bodies, replacing it with my own orders to move them or have them do what I want. Things like that. It is all temporary, though. Amazing. That kind of power has the capacity to do amazing things. I couldn't even begin to properly understand your innate potential. I can easily imagine you becoming number one with a dual-wielded power of that strength. I'm sure you could rank first one day, even in the whole world. Midoriya's pen might run out of ink soon. And also, I'm curious if there is a limit to the weight of objects that you can move with your telekinetic energy. Like, would you be able to lift a building with the same effort that you could lift a notebook or something? You placed your hands into your pockets. There can sometimes be a slight drawback, but my power does not obey the laws of physics. Amazing, he whispered. You looked over your shoulder at him and smiled warmly. You got any more questions? He finally peeled his eyes away from his notepad that had 2 whole pages of new scribble on it, and he looked at you. Thousands. Well, let's sit down then. You chuckled as the two of you turned a corner and arrived at the cafeteria. I'm starving. You were walking out of the school with your hands in pockets, pleasantly satisfied with your enlightening experiences at school. You were excited to get home so you could call 𝐒𝐭𝐲 and tell him about all the people you had met. You had your earphones in to drown out the sound of pedestrians thinking, but you were forced to take them out when someone grabbed your arm. You knew who it was before you turned around. You raised an eyebrow at him and he quickly let go of your arm, not wanting you to retaliate the way you had the last time he approached you like this. Bakugou, fight me, he barked, making sure not to stand too close to you, as to not pressure you into a reactive corner. If you really are as strong as you say, then fight me on even grounds, one-on-one, and show me. Show me that you're not completely full of shit. In his mind, you found a memory of him spending the lunch hour in the nurse's office, getting a broken rib tended to by one of the staff. The fact that he had received a taste of your power, learned his lesson the hard way, and was still staying true to his values. He had been hurt and his ego took a big hit, but yet he still approached you again, seemingly fearless, in hopes of figuring out the indisputable superior between you. Bakugou Katsuki was filled to the brim with theories and notions, and it was a pleasant surprise that he wasn't going to abandon his convictions at the first sign of struggle. You were impressed, and you couldn't help but smile at him. You're persistent, Pop Rocks. I like it. You turned your full attention to him, and adjusted your bag strap at your shoulder. Of course I am. As if I'll let some extra go around claiming to be the best, without actually proving anything. You want my respect, you gotta earn it. And the only way to do that is to show me that you're not a complete weakling. When did I ask for your respect? You know what I'm talking about. He deadpanned, not wanting to play cat and mouse with you. Quit beating around the bush. Me and you, we're gonna fight. This Saturday, at the ground beta training facility. If you didn't have the blindfold on, your eyes would be flat and bored. But maybe there would be a little sparkle in them. Just for him. Fine. He looked a little startled to hear you agree with him so easily, and without any retaliation. He was expecting you to try and argue, and he wasn't going to let you get away with saying no. But you had agreed to his challenge without batting an eye, which was not something Bakugou was used to. His eyes went a little wider, and his throat made a tiny tick noise, showcasing his shock. But it's gotta be after 8 p.m. I have shit to do. He blinked a few times. Fine. But if you try and flake, just know that I'll track you down. You sighed. Yup. And don't tell the teachers either. Sure. You nodded once. So we done here? Yeah. Fuck off now. He dismissed you, and his face made him an open book. Bakugou was not nearly as heartless as he was pretending to be. You weren't going to show Bakugou that you were excited about the fight, because you didn't want him backing out either. You were looking forward to Saturday, because he had earned your respect today. You bid him a goodbye with a casual nod, and then you turned away, continuing on your path home for only 2 seconds before he called out to you again. Oi. You turned back around to face him. Why the hell are you telling people you can read minds if you've actually got a decent power? What's the point in downplaying yourself? He was asking you this because he was genuinely curious. He wanted to know your intentions and what your strategy was. Were you keeping your strength a secret so that you could take everyone by surprise and climb the ranks? Were you trying to play the underdog? Or were you actually stupid enough to think that being humble was going to get you anywhere in the hero scene? Bakugou was desperate to know. You tilted your head. I can read minds. Bullshit. You twisted your body a little more towards him, and then you put your hands in your pockets. Before you approached me, you were thinking about your mom's spicy mapo tofu that she's making you for dinner. You were pretty excited to get home for that reason. And now, you're thinking, there's no way this dumb bitch thinks she has any chance at reading my mind. Bakugou's eyes widened, and you were grinning. What the fuck? He thought, unable to form words for a moment. There was no way you had hit the nail on the head so perfectly. There's no way you could have just guessed that. So how the hell did you get that information? What kind of tricks were you playing on him? You smiled. There's a lot you've got to learn about me. TCH. He scoffed and looked away, masking his fear and anger, and pretending to be ticked off. He was still partially in denial about the fact that you had access to his thoughts. Like I want to know shit about you. You almost choked trying to hold back your laugh. He truly was a funny character, and you like to give credit where it was due. See you later. Whatever. And stay the fuck out of my head, Megamind. You scoffed and turned away. Wish I could. It's fucking gross in there. 3 weeks later. You'd be lying if you said you anticipated everything that had happened in the last few weeks of school. Even with your power, in no world could you ever have hoped to see it coming. Every day as an official part of 1A had been madness. From an unexpected villain attack on your class at the USJ training facility, to a very hearty sports festival that really brought out the fight in everyone, you had been through a lot. And you had checked off many new boxes since being at your new academy. Of course, you made short work of the villains at the USJ, earning accolades and deep gratitude from all the teachers at your school. People that would normally prefer to keep compliments to a minimum, like Aizawa, were very open about how much they appreciated your help and how well you performed. You established an indisputable hierarchy amongst your cohort and came out right on top. It was only natural that it felt good. And it didn't come as much of a surprise that you ranked first in the sports festival either. However, during the festival, you were much more careful of how you used your powers. Understandably, you didn't want to burn any bridges or wage any wars against the other kids. But you still wanted to win. Of course you did. So you demonstrated your power clearly on, made sure not to toy with them, and you acted with just the right amount of humility and mercy to make yourself a personal favorite amongst the viewers. It was a liberating first few weeks, where you spent lots of time with your new classmates and dabbled in some blossoming friendships. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 had watched the games from your house on his TV, extremely excited to watch you destroy every challenge that you faced. He wasn't big on staying updated on the next generation of heroes, but he was very active when it came to you. He always wanted to know how things were going. After the festival, he was quick to call and congratulate you on your winnings as soon as it was over, and said that he enjoyed seeing you basking in some success, because he thought you deserved it after all this time. It was nice to finally feel some real appreciation from others for what you had done. And Bakugou. It was safe to say that you had established your supremacy with him too. When you first fought with him after the first week at Ground Beta and made your superiority clear with a supreme win, he wanted to go you again and again until he could win, which ended up being in vain, even after hours. The whole ordeal was oddly emotional, even for you. Empathy typically goes hand in hand with telepathy, as you learn more about others' situations. You weren't very surprised that Bakugou had really struggled to come to terms with your win, and you figured that he just wasn't very familiar with losing. But what did catch you off guard was that he verbally recognized your strength and admitted to your face that he had underestimated you. He was smarter than the other students gave him credit for, but you couldn't say that you blamed them. He was a hazard to be around. For most. So far, you had spent the most time with him out of all the other students, as strange as it was. You always seemed to end up together in some way, being partnered for school activities and projects, since you sat beside each other in class, and you sat at the same lunch table too. You even went to the arcade together one day after school and frequently texted each other for homework assignments. In the short 3 weeks, Bakugou had already become one of your favorite classmates. He was one of the only students who you didn't have to mind read, because his feelings were always written all over his face or spilling out of his mouth. You never had to worry about sincerity like you did with others, because Bakugou had no conscience when it came to shouting out exactly what he was thinking. You really liked his authenticity. It was refreshing. You never doubted his honesty. And that was why you had already gained so much respect for him as a fellow student. And since Bakugou had recognized you as someone who was strong, he had grown to have a very discreet affection for you too. He knew you'd be competing together for a very long time, and so he wanted to keep you at arm's length. Though he never quite lost the attitude. Bakugou worked in weird ways, but you were the best person fit for understanding where his bizarre traits came from. As you were thinking about everything that you had been through with a distant smile on your face, you were also standing, still at the front of the crowded class. Everyone was in their hero suits as they listened to their teacher's instructions. Bakugou was standing just behind you and looking over your shoulder. You heard Bakugou's thoughts as he took a quick glance at the back of your head. What the hell is that? Sugar cookies? Who the hell wants their hair to smell like that? Fucking weirdo. He let a small scoff out through his nose and he looked back up at 𝐒𝐻𝐻. I guess it smells kinda good. You concealed a smirk and looked down at the concrete in front of you. He was so funny. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 stood before the class and looked over all of you as he began the lesson. Listen up, students. Today, we're going to be taking a different approach to your hero training. His voice took all of you by storm, and something about his general demeanor suggested that he was plotting. He held his hands behind his back and looked like he wanted to take a nap, but he continued anyway. Honestly, it isn't very often that we have a student that is this far ahead of the rest of their peers. But this year, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 superiority in terms of power runs circles around the rest of you. And that isn't to say that she is above you in value, or as a human or student, but her quirk, as you know, is very difficult to combat, even for the strongest in our school. I believe those of you that are the most likely to climb the hero ranks after graduation will still not be able to overtake her. None of you individuals have any type of power that can truly combat what she can do. So, in consideration of that, we have cultivated an activity that I believe will challenge all of you. Even 𝗧𝗏. You pursed your lips, not enjoying being singled out in front of everyone. Because not only was it embarrassing, but you also didn't want the class to grow to resent you. Your power was bound to induce jealousy in others, and you didn't want these people to fall victim to that. You wanted to remain civil. Or friends even. So, all of you will be going against 𝗧𝗏 in a training battle, heroes versus villain style. Oh, great red heart. What? Sir, we have to fight her. Yes. He turned to you. 𝗧𝗏, you will be stationed in the center of Training Ground Beta. Your goal will be to capture a flag that is stationed on the other side of the map. You will wait where I place you until the alarm rings, and the rest of the class will have 30 minutes prior to the alarm to conjure a plan of how they want to overthrow you. Their objective is to stop you from capturing the flag. You sighed heavily and dropped your shoulders, picturing all 19 students using their excessive training to go against you. 19 versus 1. And to be honest, your odds still remained good. Alright. Bakugou stared at the back of your head, wishing he could read your mind. 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝗲 jumped up and threw her hand into the air. Sir, how's that fair? Yeah. None of us can do crap to combat her power at all. How could we ever hope to go against her? We're useless against her. She's got mind control, for crying out loud. Your eyes flicked over to 𝗧𝗏 and he looked beyond disappointed, staring at the kids as if they had just asked him the color of the sky. How annoying. 𝗧𝗏 sighed and rubbed his eyes in frustration. Listen to me very carefully, kids. If any of you even dream to actually become heroes one day, You do well to abandon the notion that strength is the deciding factor of a battle. If you think of your opponent as unstoppable, abandoning or even doubting your chances to win just because they have an edge over you, then you will never succeed in heroism. Your training here is to teach you how to overcome these challenges, and if you are unwilling to give it your all despite your chances of victory, then you might as well take off your uniforms and take your sorry asses home now. All the vocal students who spoke out before were suddenly silent. Everybody was understandably embarrassed, and you didn't exactly love being the class spectacle. 𝐈𝐧𝐿 made his point. Short and sweet. Everybody has a weakness. 𝐈𝐧𝐿's eyes turned red as he glanced at you. A weakness can be leveraged. You were standing alone. There was a cool chill in the air, and it was kissing your arms as you stood still, patiently. Your hair was blowing in the breeze, and your eyes were closed under the blindfold. With your hands in your pockets, your body was high vibrational and still as you trained your attention on any voices in the zone. You had been waiting in the center of the CBD, waiting for the beginning bell to ring. You were aware that the other students had been given 30 minutes to figure out a plan of attack. So, up until now, you had made a point of intentionally not reading any of their minds. You focused your attention onto other miscellaneous things while waiting for the 30 minutes to finish. Because not only did you want to give them all a chance to really conjure something solid, but you were also interested in how they were going to go about it. But the bell rung 3 minutes ago, meaning the exercise had long since begun. So where was everyone? You couldn't hear any thoughts, and of course couldn't see anyone. Trying a little harder to find some answers, you sharpened your focus and searched for any voice in the perimeter that sounded somewhat familiar. Wait, is that Eminem? What the hell are we gonna do? 𝐒𝐩�ou𝐽𝐻 panicked, surrounded in all of her classmates, -1. We're totally screwed. We need to figure out a plan. It's as simple as organizing something that 𝐳𝐸𝐺 won't be able to predict. Yeah, well, you got any ideas, smartass? 'Cause I don't know about you, but I've never seen her so much a struggle. The girl is basically God. She has to have a weakness. We just have to figure it out. Everybody calm down. We have time. We need to be rational right now if we want any shot at winning this. There's absolutely nothing rational we could possibly think of. It would take a miracle. No matter what, if 𝐳𝐸𝐺 were really a villain, going out there would be a suicide mission. Even 𝐈𝐧𝐿-sensei's quirk wasn't enough to stop her. I have an idea. Midoriya stated clearly and confidently, making everyone turn to look at him. Respectfully, Midoriya, I doubt you can think of anything that will actually change our fate. I'd like to hear him out. 𝗏𝗏 said. Midoriya took a deep breath, recalling the notes in his hero analysis book. So, as we know, 𝐳𝐸𝐺 can read minds, and she can use that as a tool to track and identify people. So we know that as soon as this thing starts, she's gonna locate all of us individually, and we will have no way of hiding who we are from her. But if we can somehow block her from reading our thoughts by, not thinking, then we can have an advantage. How on earth can we do that, Midoriya? Do you have any idea of how hard it is to not think? Like I said, I have an idea. Well, spit it the fuck out. Bakugou snapped, interested in the potential of figuring out some way to beat you, although it seemed impossible. He turned to face his classmate with his eyebrows cinched in concentration. Yaozu, do you think you can make 20 pairs of headphones? As everyone looked at her, she nervously glanced around and cleared her throat. Sure I can. But what for? I have a theory, so stick with me on this. I think that if we play something like really intense music with lots of fast words in our ears as loud as possible, then our brains will have trouble thinking about anything else. Right. We'll be overstimulated. We will all be completely overloaded with words. If it's loud enough, we won't be able to focus. It'll just be the music in our heads. And if that works, then I'm pretty confident that 𝐳𝐸𝐺 will not be able to distinguish who is who when we get closer to her. Midoriya didn't feel good using what he had learned about your quirk in an attempt to stop you, but he also knew that this training was going to be beneficial for him and the others. And if he didn't know any better, he'd say that you were looking forward to a challenge. But how can we focus on attacking her if we can't even think straight? That's a good point. And that's why we need the front of our plan to be someone who can attack without thinking. All of them turned to Bakugou. I'm in. He barked. We might as well try it out, right? What do we have to lose? That's the spirit. Thousands of words flood in from every angle of the clearing. And it was odd, because something about the organized chaos and it was weirdly familiar. You knew the words you were hearing, almost to the point that you could sing along. You knew exactly where the words were coming from. And it was a fucking Eminem song. Why the hell could you hear Eminem blasting from all four corners of the arena? Why was there at least 15 different speeds of the same song, and why was it all you could hear? You couldn't imagine why the teachers would be playing it over the speakers, so where was all of this sound coming from? You tilted your head to desperately try and dig past the multiple layers to find some answers. And that was when someone came into view. Midoriya blasted into the opening, surrounded in surging green energy and an angry look in his eye. And he was wearing headphones. You should have sensed him coming. How did he get so close? Why couldn't you hear his thoughts? Did Aizawa erase your telepathy? No, you could still hear the music with it. So what the hell was going on? Where was everyone else? If Izuku got this close to you undetected, then he must have figured out a way to bypass your mind reading. But how? That had never been done before. You gasped as he shot past you, shooting out his black whip tendrils to make an attempt at catching you. In a split second, you swished your hand in front of you and used your telekinesis to throw Midoriya backwards, and he smashed into the ground a moment later. But you had no time to gather yourself, as the song suddenly sounded very close again. Spinning around, you met Bakugou right behind you, screaming with his hands out in front of him. Eat shit. Fuck. All you can hear is that fucking song. You can't focus. There were two other students to your left, coming at you with close combat attacks. To you, it felt like the scene had gone into slow motion, as you gained control of Bakugou's body and redirected his explosion towards the two students at your side. You winced after the attack went off, realizing that being on the receiving end of that blast was not going to be pleasant. As you watched them both roll on the floor with their skin smoking, you felt the strong urge to apologize and help them back up. But you didn't even have time to open your mouth before you had to hold Dark Shadow back with your telekinesis. Why were they all wearing headphones? Why was Eminem's voice so annoying right now? After forcing Bakugou back, you quickly turned around to see Midoriya standing up again, adjusting his headphones to straighten them back over his ears, and that was the moment that you realized what was happening. Over half of the class was now standing around the clearing, keeping their distance from you and trying to work out what to do next, since their plan, Midoriya and Bakugou's sneak attack, didn't work. You finally understood, and a surprised grin took over your face. Not bad. I'm assuming that was your idea, Midoriya? He narrowed his eyes, unhappy to have failed the first attack. He was already trying to figure out his next move, but it was hard to focus with the music blasting in his ears. He could barely even read your lips. I'm impressed. You didn't move a muscle as each of the 20 pairs of earphones all floated off the students' heads, lifting up into the sky. Nobody was able to do anything to stop you as all of the headphones were instantly crushed in the air, turning into pulverized plastic. Sorry, but it was a good try, I'll give you that. Finally, you could hear their thoughts clearly. In the next 5 seconds, you located Shudo, and you immediately forced your way into his head. You forced him to stand still, unable to move or think as you trapped him in a makeshift prison, all on your own volition. Of course, he was no match for your mind control, as he stood still like a zombie, under your command. After that box was checked, you searched for the others who you considered to be the biggest threats, and that was when you sensed 2 of them coming at you. Tokoyami and Uraraka had helped each other to throw Ida and Kaminari at you, giving them the necessary momentum to get close enough to you, since they knew their window of opportunity was very small. The other 2 were both in the sky, moving through the air towards you at the speed of a supercar, thanks to their weightlessness. Ida had his leg craned back and his reciproburst engaged as he was going to try to kick you, and Kaminari had his hands in front of his body as he began unleashing a large-scale electrical attack. The 2 didn't think that through very well. Your hands came up and you swished them towards each other, making the 2 boys turn to face one another, and their attacks did the same thing. The students watching all gasped in horror as Ida's supercharged kick landed Kaminari right in his gut, and at the very same time, Ida was electrocuted in the air after receiving all of Kaminari's bolts right to the chest, and he started to fit. Both of them fell to the ground. You didn't have time to feel bad before the other students were attacking again. The next 5 minutes were filled with defense as you combated against the onslaught of various quirk attacks. You maintained your composure and focused on multitasking, which was important when you were facing 19 people at once. You fought back against the others without intentionally hurting them, and you didn't disregard the importance of keeping 𝐎𝐩𝐽𝐻 still. You felt Kirishima running at you full speed like a human battering ram, and that was when you engaged a thick, dense force field of telekinetic energy around yourself. Like a cage, the fluorescent blue zaps of power encased your body, and when Kirishima made contact with it, he bounced a few feet back as if he had hit a titanium wall. "Sorry," you whispered as he gathered himself. "Shit," he cussed, thinking, "whatever that is, it's more unbreakable than me." Your protective circle did its job over the next few moments, and once everyone else was in an awkward standstill, fresh out of ideas and attacks, you took the time to start to walk towards the flag, already aware of its position and whereabouts. 𝐈𝐧𝐭 had made it clear that the other students were not allowed to touch the flag or move it, meaning that the only way to win was to stop you from reaching it in the 10-minute period. Since the outcome of the exercise was already obvious to you, you decided to just move forward and end the round quickly. You didn't like the fighting sequence, because the other students were getting hurt and frustrated at your hand. Plus, you only had about 2 minutes left. So with that thought, you started to walk. The circle of telekinetic energy remained buzzing around your person as you marched past the class. "Stop her. Someone. Don't let her go." 𝐎𝐩𝐽𝐻 launched acid all over the ground in front of you, but you walked right over it. Shiji and Tokoemi run towards you, hoping to stop you, but you got in their heads and made them turn the other way. Midoriya and 𝐬𝐸 were quick thinkers as they both came flying down at you, and each of them dug their feet into the street curbs as they sent their restraints to you. Multiple layers of 𝐬𝐸's tape flew around your circle of protective energy, as did Midoriya's black whip, in an attempt to hold you in place. "Hold on. Don't let go." You didn't even look behind you as you enlarged the circle, forcing each of their restraints to instantly snap. "Shit." You completely ignored the others' attempts at stopping you, and made sure not to neglect keeping 𝐎𝐸𝐻 under control, since you knew a large ice wall could prove to be an issue right now. And the same went for Bakugou, who was standing still staring at the concrete. The strongest of the students were already mostly incapable of moving, which meant you had a clean slate to victory. You came into a second clearing 20 very chaotic seconds later, as the entire class had launched their best attacks at you, only to be no match against the energy protecting you. Your eyes landed on the red flag a few meters in front of you in the street. And just as you took your next step towards it, you heard Midoriya's panicked voice echo through the surrounding streets. "Last resort. Yamamoto now." You turned around at the deafening sound of a cannon booming. 5 seconds after the intense heat waves washed over the nearby students, all that could be heard was heavy breathing and scattering shards of concrete. The huge bomb that Yaoyorozu had blasted at you did immense damage to the street, and the blast radius was enormous. And as the smoke finally started to clear, you came into view, revealed standing at the center of the chaos. Completely still and untouched. That was your last resort? Your calm voice sent a chill down the spine of everyone who had just witnessed the explosion firsthand. "Well, does anyone have anything else they want to try?" No response. The others were clearly in shock. "All right then." You bent down to pick up the flag. "I win." After the training was over with, 𝐈𝐧𝐭 spoke with the class as a whole. He congratulated everyone for their creativity and resourcefulness, recognizing that they had done a better job than he thought they would. Despite ultimately losing the battle, he made it clear that he was impressed with their efforts. You were standing alone as 𝐈𝐧𝐭 dismissed the class, and had just turned to start heading back towards campus, before Bakugou popped up beside you. You glanced up at him. "You're weak," he said with a low voice. "You rely too much on your quirk. You're neglecting your physical body." You remained still, your head craned up towards his. And if you want to ever have any real strength, you need to be faster and stronger. Your quirk will be wasted on a weakling if you rely on it as much as you do forever. It's a fucking waste if you're nothing without it. You tilted your head slightly and couldn't help but smile. Bakugou had closely monitored your behavior in the battle as if it were his own, and that was his conclusion. He had watched your every move, followed your thought process, and he decided that you had been overly reliant on your quirk. Because of his nature, He wanted to see you push your limits and continue to improve. The thought of that made you feel a little giddy. Well, do you want to train me, then? He looked offended that you even asked. TCH, is that a joke? What the hell would I gain from that? You raised your eyebrows. You can teach me combat techniques, help me grow my strength, and you can train at the same time, right? Two birds with one stone. You slipped your hands into your pockets, and you had an amused smirk on your lips. Plus, if you want some incentive, how about, for every single time you spar with me, I'll let you have another attempt at beating me with your quirk. You can try and try to your little heart's content, until you can finally beat me. You're on. He snapped back. You chuckled and held out your hand in front of him. It was easier than you expected to convince him, but he was sort of predictable in times like this. To you, at least. You knew how to work your way around his attitude. Bakugou stared at your hand with a grumpy look, and then he suddenly slapped it as hard as he could. Then, he started to walk away. But you're stupid if you think I'll let you slack off. I'd sure hope not. It was the end of class and the teacher had already left, but the students were all still in the middle of packing up. Everyone takes their time gathering their things. Since it's the last class of the day, none of them had to rush off. You were still sitting in your seat, putting your pencils away somewhat slowly, when an unfamiliar voice silences the chattering 1A classroom. Hey! You glance up. It sounded more like a bark than a polite greeting. Which one of you has the mind control quirk? Your head turns towards the door, and you see a tall, handsome young man standing in front of an entire crowd of students. He has lavender-colored hair, and he's right in the doorframe, standing proudly, with a bit of anger on his face. You somewhat remember him from the sports festival, but you cannot remember his quirk. You raise your hand. That's me. Shinso Hitoshi. Quirk, brainwash. He can put someone under his mind control if he can get them to verbally respond to him in conversation, and so he has to use manipulation techniques to trick people. His quirk has weaknesses that yours absolutely doesn't. He's a quiet boy that was often told he couldn't be a hero because of the creepy nature of his quirk, but he maintained confidence in it anyway. He is no match for you. Shinso steps into the classroom, while the crowd of students behind him wait at the door, and he seems to be approaching your table directly. Kirishima, your new friend, jumps up to his feet and puts his hand against Shinsu's chest. I wouldn't do that if I were you, bro. Yeah man, she's pretty strong. Kaminari calls out. Shinso slaps Kirishima away and comes to stand right in front of you. So what's the deal with your quirk? You tilt your head and sense his eagerness for you to respond. It was clear that he was going to make an attempt on brainwashing you, but it wasn't like you were going to stop him from at least trying. What about it? He engages his quirk and you feel Shinsu's power come at you like a tsunami, instantly. No hesitation. You see and feel it in your brain, washing over you in strong waves, trying to take control, the very moment you responded. But unfortunately for him, it isn't quite strong enough. In the intense altercation, you split his attack in half like the Red Sea. The waves of his power mold around your still, untouched form, instead of crashing into you. And then you redirect that power, changing the color of the metaphorical water and tipping the scales in your favor. Suddenly, Shinso blinks and finds himself to be standing in an endless white void that he doesn't recognize. You are 2 meters apart and directly facing each other. Shinso gasps in terror and looks around him for answers, only to find nothing. What the dash? Where the hell are we? Your hands are in your pockets. You wanted in on my brain, so here we are. This is your brain? How did we get here? Shinsu's breaths are short and riddled with anxiety as he struggles to comprehend what he's seeing. It's empty and so quiet that he can hear his own heart thudding in his chest. I was only trying dash. You wanted control, right? To control me. Your blindfold is gone and Shinso sees your eyes, deeply shocked by the way they glowed. You take a step towards him, and your face is dripping with confidence and you look relaxed, as you were sure that he had no power in this place. Well, if you really thought you had any chance at succeeding, you are sorely mistaken. Shinso takes one step back, and he looks down. He sees nothing but empty whiteness beneath his shoes, and he's met with the same when he looks up at the sky that isn't there. This is an infinite prison, and Shinso has quite possibly never been this confused in his whole life. What the hell? You really want to know what it's like in my head? To be a telepath? Well, if you're so curious, let me show you. In a flash, you are right in front of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and you bring your pointer finger up, pressing it against his forehead as he is frozen in fear. And in a split second, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is bombarded with the weight of the world. Millions of videos flash past his eyes. He sees tens of thousands of different faces, each riddled with different types of pain, and he hears blood-curdling screaming and feels his skin burning, and people are begging him for help and they're crying. He can hear tires screeching on asphalt, wood breaking, girls gossiping, and beer bottles shattering. He sees marred flesh, broken bones, burning wires, and riptides with drowning animals. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 can't make sense of any of it as all the visuals flash past his face, making it impossible for him to breathe. He grabs his head with both hands and is in agony, unable to comprehend everything zapping through his brain like a live wire. His throat feels like it's bleeding, and a scream chokes him up. You remove your finger and casually slide your hand back into your pocket. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 drops to his knees and has tears streaming down his face. He looks completely traumatized, and his chest is heaving for air, while struggling to find any. You stare down at him in pity. Go ahead and poke around in my brain as much as you like. But I can guarantee you won't like what you'll find. You are confident that you had portrayed the message with enough might to make your point. And so in the next second, you break the connection, free him from your mind, and the two of you return to your bodies in the classroom. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eyes are wide and his mouth is dry. He is sweating and panting, and he can't believe what he has just seen. He takes a step back and brings one hand up to touch his temple, staring at you like you were a ghost. That power. The confused students had circled around the two of you, and they're all silent, unsure of what you had just done to him, and unwilling to ask any questions. Yeah, it's a fucking headache. You stand to your feet and throw your bag over your shoulder. So don't try that shit on me again if you want your sanity to stay intact. You walk past him and don't bother to look back at the madness you left in the classroom. Girl. Sitting on 𝗧𝗵𝗲's left side at lunch, it wasn't very often that you were approached by excited girls with pink hair. But today seemed to be an exception. Afternoon, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. How are you? I'm great, thanks. She drags on all her syllables and is talking in a higher tone than usual, signifying that she was planning something. Hey, so Todoroki, would you mind if I stole Y/N for a bit? Just a quick chat. He glances up from his serving of cold soba with a relatively neutral expression on his face, and he looks at you. I don't mind, but you'll have to ask her. Great. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 quickly pulls you by your arm out of your seat and shuffles across the room with you by her side, giggling and keeping her head down. She avoids the glances of everyone else in the cafeteria expertly. You wondered where she was going with all this, but decided against reading her mind to save the surprise. So, she suddenly stops walking and turns around to face you. I have a really big favor to ask you. Oh? What is it? You tilt your head. She props her foot up onto her toes and starts to roll her ankle around nervously. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to, read someone's mind for me? I know it's so annoying and you probably get this all the time, but girl, I need your help. Her tone suggests that she is in no sort of danger at all. Who and why? She looks over your shoulder and her cheeks are even pinker than usual, with excitement. I need you to see if Midoriya has a crush on Uraraka. And vice versa. You raise an eyebrow and turn around to look to where she was looking, noticing the two of them chatting near the toilets with their food trays. Don't you think that's a little invasive? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 shakes her head intensely. This is totally for the greater good. I know it might seem seedy, but in reality, I'm doing this for them. They're gonna thank me later. You quickly look back at her to shoot her a dirty look, and then you turn again to stare at the two victims chatting. Both of them are flushed red with nerves, and their body language suggests a little tension. You almost laugh. Do you even need my telepathy to figure out the answer? You point your finger up towards Uraraka. I mean, just look at her. I know, wow, but a girl's gotta be sure. You sigh heavily, dropping your shoulders and wishing to be set free of 𝗧𝗵𝗲's shipping drama. But ultimately, you realized she was showing no signs of retreat. Fine. You press your lips into a thin line as you concentrate, expertly sifting through all the other voices you could hear in the crowded room to find the desired one. It took you about 3 seconds to find Midoriya's voice, and then you focused in. You spend a moment sorting through his thousands of thoughts to find the answer to Ishido's question, and then you snap back to her. He thinks she's really cute and sweet. He likes nice people, and she's the nicest girl he's ever met. You begin, sounding bored. Overall, as a person, he likes her. But he doesn't spend much time pondering on it. He's got too much other shit going on. Damn 𝗧𝗏𝗏. She looks defeated. You smile at her. But I think if she were to approach him and bring the conversation to the surface, he would not deny her. Her face lights up. You think so? You nod. I think so. Ishido jumps up and down with excitement, already coming up with ways that she could force Uriarika to have that conversation with him. She pulls you into a hug and thanks you 1,000 times before skipping off to begin her romantic scheming. You shake your head in amusement and head back to your seat beside Shido. So what was that about? You smile to yourself as you lean down and continue eating your meal. Just girly things. He stares at you speechless for a few seconds, blinking slowly, before he finally turns back to his own food. I understand. You quickly read his thoughts on instinct and come to learn that Shido had assumed you were talking about menstruation. You almost spit out your food trying to withhold your laugh, but inevitably decide to let him live in blissful ignorance, rather than correcting him. It was funnier that way. 3 years later. Do we have a plan? The plan is to fucking murder the bastard. Bakugou snarls as his palms let off warning shots. Good. You shake your head with an amused scoff. Glad we're on the same page. You and the rest of the 3A class had been recruited to a hero mission, where you were needed to help stop a villain that was attacking the city. Upon your arrival, you come to find that the pros already on scene were having a hard time taming the suspect. He was a very large man that had some kind of growth quirk. However, those simple words did his power no kind of justice. The man could grow every part of his body to extreme lengths. Not just stretch out his limbs, but he could physically enlarge all of himself, and his gigantic, endless rolls of flesh were not exactly normal either. It seemed that his flesh was somewhat indestructible, as it seemed to be able to take hits like there's no tomorrow, and nullify almost all damage served to it. He clearly had some level of bodily regeneration too. After a quick tap into his brain, you come to realize that whoever this man once was, he was not himself anymore. He was on a rampage. He wasn't thinking. He had no rhyme or reason to his destruction, only moving to cause chaos. You weren't sure if the man was victim to brainwashing or even some sort of chemical control from a higher-up, but he was a threat to your city. The fact that he had no purpose other than to kill and maim, unleashing reckless murder and treason, was reason enough to put an end to him. The pros hadn't made a single dent in him yet, it seemed. Best Jeanist and Mirko were on him, as well as Deadshot, Gang Orca, Endeavor, and many others. Almost all of them were dealing with severe injuries, despite the rampage beginning only 15 minutes ago. Blood and despair was everywhere, and things didn't look good. You thought that if MT Lady were here, she'd be able to do some damage to the guy. But you're also sure by the look of him that he would just grow to outsize her too. By the time you and the others in 3A finally showed up, the damage done to the city was immense. Buildings had collapsed, the roads were cracked and crumbling. Broken glass littered the streets and fire was raging, turning the skies gray. Of course you happened to notice a storm brewing too, but that was the least of your worries. The danger zone perimeter was enormous, with all of the damage this man had been creating as he stomped through the city, wiping out buildings with his colossal stomach and arms, cracking the concrete beneath him, and scaring hundreds of pedestrians into very dangerous predicaments. Everything was messy. There was even a TV helicopter reporting on the tragedy that had already been whacked down by the beast, killing the people inside. Lives were lost, and you were still losing more. The man is stopped in the center of a huge clearing, surrounded in the pros and the rest of your class, while you stood with Bakugou on one side. There was still a fair bit of distance between you and the monster, as you had stopped to assess the situation and work out your game plan. Bakugou was hellbent on charging in there without hesitating, but you knew from the state of the others that was a bad idea, so you stopped him. You could also see Kirishima and Midoriya not far from you, and they were also trying to figure out what to do. All of your class had your provisional hero licenses and were set to graduate in just 5 months. In a situation like this where you are called to assist, you are all licensed to act on your own accord and make your decisions of what is the best course of action. You are trained and ready. You are only a moment away from making your first decision when you hear your work phone ringing in the hip pocket of your hero suit. And without taking your eyes off the battlefield, you answer it and bring it to your ear. Key, where are you? Hey kid, I just got word of what's going on over there, but I'm a little occupied right now with some bullshit in Kyushu. Do you think you've got it handled? 𝗵𝗲𝗏 isn't answering his phone. What's his status? Yeah, I can see 𝗵𝗲𝗏. He's alright. Don't worry if you can't get here, we got it. Alright, I trust ya. Just be careful, I hear this guy isn't a joke. Of course. You too. You put your phone back into your pocket. And upon a quick assessment of the field and the fast increasing dangers, you realize that there were multiple pros set with the task of gathering and protecting the people, which was an immediate relief. On all four sides of the burning clearing, there were groups of terrified people screaming for mercy and being protected by the professionals. 𝗏𝗏 was covered in blood, but he was using his expertise to protect a group of 15 endangered people on the left wing. And the same went for 𝗵𝗲𝗏's group. He was helping get them to safety with some of the other pros. There was a small group focused on fighting the villain, but they didn't seem to be making any real progress. You were glad that the pros had spread out their resources and were focusing on getting the people to safety. But you happened to notice some who were unguarded. 2 streets over, completely out of eyeshot. You learned immediately that they were stuck in a dead end, being backed into a corner. There were about 10 of them, and they were all sure that death was going to find them before any hero could. Their fears were gruesome and terrifying. Children, elderly, and everyone in between were crowded together, waiting for the dreaded moment where the villain would come around the corner and murder all of them like he had to many just minutes before. You could hear them praying for God to protect their families, counting their lucky stars, and trying to hold themselves together for the sake of the children. They had no hope. You can hear the building beside them creaking and groaning, as if it were about to crumble under pressure. And nobody knows they are there except for you. 𝗏𝗏𝗏, I gotta go. There's something I gotta do. You turn to your partner who you had grown very used to fighting alongside. You and the others can handle this guy, right? There's people in danger over there. He turns to you and looks offended, already in a sweaty panic. They won't be in danger if we take this guy down right now. They're scared, and they need help. At least just stall for a bit. Dumbass, the best way to help them is to destroy the threat. Bakugou argues as his face starts turning red. Are you really Katsuki? He stops himself and shudders at the sternness in your voice, recognizing that you probably knew more than he would ever be able to. Over the last 3 years, you had earned not only Bakugou's respect, but his trust, too. He wholeheartedly trusted your judgment as if it were his own, and he very rarely doubted you. He drops his shoulders. Okay, go. You turn on your heel and look off in the direction of the tilting building that you couldn't see from this far away. But get your ass back here as soon as you're done. I'll be back. You promise. Bakugou watches you blast off into the clouds and out of sight, and he drops his shoulders before turning back to face the villain. He whispers, Be fast, Megamind. I think we're gonna need you. Running towards the alley where you could hear the people praying, you notice the building already tilting. Dread sinks in as you realize you had barely made it in time. You have 3 seconds. You slide around the corner seeing 8 people huddled desperately together and against the wall. In the same breath, you hold out both hands, using your telekinesis to pull all of the people towards you. They scream and shout in terror as their bodies move without their control, and you bring them all together at your feet as the building beside you finally gives in. Get down. You wrap your body over the top of them as they are hunched in a pile, and you engage a force field around all of you, right at the same second that the building folds in on itself. You are all squeezing your eyes shut and trembling as the ground shakes beneath you, as the area is overwhelmed by the weight of the falling building, and a tsunami of smoke and ash washes through all the streets. You and the others are safe inside your bubble as it trembles. After a very scary 15 seconds, they start to open their eyes and you are all met with deafening silence. You are surrounded in smoke still, and there are huge pillars of concrete and rubble resting against the top of your force field. The others underneath you start to come to their senses. Everybody just stay still. It's okay now, you're safe. You keep your voice low as the space was very small, and you want to appear calm to ease their nerves. Then you use your telekinesis to slowly move all the rubble off of the force field. I'm just gonna clear us a safe path. Luckily, everybody follows your instructions. They try not to move as you very carefully move all the damage away from you with telekinesis, and once you are sure it's safe, you disengage the force field. You help all the people stand to their feet, checking for severe injuries or unconscious people, and are pleased to find that everyone seems to be okay. Somewhat. There is a new fire about 4 meters away from your group, and you quickly swish your hand through the air, extinguishing it immediately. Is everyone okay? You ask, while able to clearly hear multiple of Bakugou's explosions going off in the distance. Why, yeah. I think so, miss. What's going on over there? Is the villain defeated? As one of the children, a little girl, starts asking you questions, you hear Midoriya's voice in your head. Crap. We might need some serious help here. He sounds scared. Midoriya isn't directly asking you for help, but you can feel that he is in danger. He doesn't feel good about the situation at all, as he knows the villain is combating huge numbers of heroes with ease. You can feel his grasping feeling, his fear, and it's almost as if your mind had given you access to his thoughts because it knew that they needed help, and you might be the only one able to give it to them. Your power had evolved so much over the years. And now, sometimes, it was able to act on its own accord. Everything is going to be okay. You smile at the nervous civilians, hoping to ease them. What I need now is for all of you to head into that building over there. You need to stay together, and stay low. I'll send someone to come and aid you as soon as I can. And then you hear Bakugou. His mind is utter chaos. He is losing control of the situation, desperately trying to come up with ideas on how he could hope to stop the force of the man. That was my biggest attack. Is he really that far away from me? You can feel his fear in your own body. It's contagious. He is falling short of ideas, as his biggest move made no sort of effect on the beast. That concerns you. Because if this villain was capable of making Bakugou Katsuki consider defeat, or that he was out of moves, then he was not someone to underestimate. Sensing Bakugou's struggle, even with all this distance between you, made you realize how real the imminent threat was. And you realized that they were going to need your power. You usher the civilians towards the building, and that is when you notice that it's going to rain soon. A sense of dread washes over you. It's a bad feeling in your gut, and it makes you nauseous. What the hell is going on? You quickly turn on your heel to look back down the street where you had come from. The hot, smoky wind flows down the pulverized road, and is kissing your face and lifting your hair. You can smell fire and blood, and a small part of you knows something that the rest of you doesn't. Something sinister. Right at the back of your brain, in the deepest, darkest corner, there is a little screaming ball of disgruntled energy. It feels like pure doom and it has something to say to you, but the rest of the traffic in your brain is silencing it. This part of you feels like it has a warning to give, but its voice is not loud enough to reach your ears. Time is running out. You can feel it in your blood. So with that realization, you move. A huge gust of power scoops you up and you shoot off into the sky, leaving behind a shockwave that blows against the crowd of people you had just helped. You blast off extremely fast and with laser-sharp focus, too aware of the fact that time was of the essence. You pierce through the dark storm clouds and fly above them, coming up into clear skies that were hidden behind the clouds. The wind blows harshly against your face as you analyze your direction and speed, already listening out to get a recap of the situation before you are to arrive. Your hair flies around messily, and your blindfold perfectly matches your black hero suit. The straps of it dance with your hair in the wind as you fly towards the battleground. You felt grateful in this moment that Bakugou had done such a good job of teaching you how to use your quirk to fly better. Since you used to only be able to float, but now, you were able to fly like some sort of real superhero. And not only that, but your body was in peak physical condition now, thanks to all your hard work. After training with him 4 times a week for the last 3 years, you have gone through a complete transition. Your body is lean and your muscles are strong. You can move around with impressive agility and have a heightened reaction time, even without your quirk. You can lift heavy weights and fight better than you ever thought you'd be able to. Bakugou made you feel stronger and more confident in your body, as you didn't have to rely so much on your quirk anymore. And that's not even to mention all the work you had done with 𝐎𝐸𝐽 too. You two were in a never-ending cycle of bettering each other, always sharing meals and advice. You put lots of time into always being good friends to each other, always showing up and helping when it was needed, even if it was just a simple hug. Everybody had helped each other grow into the best versions of themselves. And you were going to make fine young heroes. 6 seconds later, you pierce through the dark gray cloud and come out right above the thickest part of the commotion. Your eyes land on the villain and you notice that he's gotten even bigger, as he now takes up 70% of the area. It's horrifying. You can see everyone scattered around him, looking like ants in contrast to his size, and things were not looking good. You fly down towards it, spotting your partner from before, and you clench your jaw as you approach the ground and suddenly appear at Bakugou's side. Your heart aches as he is hunched over, glaring up at the monster across the field, and he's breathing heavily, but struggling to find enough oxygen. He is clutching an injured arm, and his mind is running circles around himself as he panics, trying to work out the best way to tip the scale of the battle in the hero's favor. He and the others had been getting demolished in this fight. Everyone was hurt, and even Bakugou was having trouble finding an opening to deal any sort of damage to the villain. Gloom was everywhere. You place your hand on his shoulder. He jumps, and then spins around to look at you. He is bleeding from a cut on his head that is spewing blood all over his face. His eyes are darkened with the heat of the anguish that was eating him up, but his face softens a little when his eyes land on you. Y/N-. It's okay, you say, hoping to bring him some peace. You did good, you can relax now. He's dashed. Bakugou stutters and chokes, and he's dizzy from the head injury. Nausea and fear is eating him up inside, as he knows 2 of his classmates are unconscious on the floor at the hand of the villain that he just couldn't overcome, no matter how hard he tried. But Bakugou is panicking, and he wants to warn you of the danger that this villain poses. But just as he is about to spew a warning, he notices the calm look on your face, and he realizes that you've already read his mind. What? His voice shakes, personifying his weakness, and he feels relieved to feel your hand on his shoulder. What are you gonna do? How can you? You feel your heart pound after his words drift off. He feels defeated. He already feels like they've lost the battle. But they hadn't. They had simply stalled long enough for you to come and finish the job. We just gotta win, right, Katsuki? Don't lose hope. You smile and tilt your head, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. It's okay, I got it from here. Bakugou is still unsure and filled with anxiety. His blood is hot and his limbs are shaking. But he watches closely as you visibly stiffen up a little, right beside him. He starts to take guesses at how you're going to stop the guy in front of you. The villain was scraping out the wall front of the city bank, sparking fire and chaos, and he was completely immune to most of the students and pros attacks. There was at least 25 people circled around him, and none of them, even the pros that were ranked in the top 3 like 𝗵𝗲𝗄, Best Jeanist, and 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐽𝑒𝐽𝑒𝐻, had managed to deal him any significant damage. His insane bodily flesh growth was impossible to combat, since it nullified damage and was able to grow much too fast to counter. He thought that maybe you'd use all the spare concrete that was broken around the area and attack him with it. No, not extravagant or efficient enough. Maybe you would try and get in his head and take control, forcing him to shrink back to his original size so that he could be apprehended. Or maybe you'd rip his head clean off. No, none of that. Bakugou analyzes your face, and he finally comes to the conclusion that it's not just confidence that you're feeling bubbling up inside of you. It isn't just raw power that is going to be the deciding factor of how you're going to stop this beast. It's anger. It's rage on behalf of everyone that's been hurt. All of your beaten and bruised classmates and mentors, who were all fighting with everything they had to stop his reign. You were angry for the civilians who were not too far away, but terrified half to death by the fact that their top heroes couldn't stop him. You're angry for others. And for just a moment, Bakugou is relieved. He recognizes the fire in you, as it perfectly matches his own. He knows that you will not allow this to go on any longer. And as much as he wants to be embarrassed to let you take control of the situation, he's just glad that someone can stop the guy. Bakugou is happy you're here. You stare at the beast, and your mouth is pressed into a flat line. You analyze the situation in front of you, assessing which people will be in the line of fire after your attack. Then you bring your hand up. You hold your open hand out in front of you at the end of a straight arm, putting the flesh villain in your eye shot, and you sharpen your aim to focus on him. Then you clench your hand into a fist with a small grunt, and the villain explodes. The ground of the city rumbles with the force of the explosion, as the gas and pressure is forced through his body from the inside out. The villain blows up into thousands of small pieces, and the destruction paints the city red. Every part of him, his head, arms, legs, and stomach, it all implodes, leaving not even a single limb behind. Pieces fly everywhere. Shit. Bakugou steps back and shields his face with his arms. He couldn't believe his eyes. Had you really just done that? What the most qualified people in the city had been trying to do with absolutely no success. Had you stopped him? That easily? You quickly use your other hand to create a small force field in front of you and Bakugou, shielding you both from the blood rain. It was way beyond gruesome. The villain's guts and flesh fall all around you, covering all of the heroes who were standing closer in pure gore. Some of them shriek in the horror of it all. Bigger pieces of flesh shoot off in every direction, some even dealing damage to the surrounding buildings. There was one high-rise that had been on a dangerous tilt, after some damage was done to the base. Construction had been going on top of it, and after the flesh pieces knock against it, it creates just enough of a wobble to send some of the pieces off. Ladders tip over, caution tape rips in two, and 3 large metal rods roll off, sliding off the edge and falling. You thought briefly that it was a shame that you had to kill the villain, but after what he had done to the people close to you, he deserved it. The two of you stare at the very disappointing remains of the villain as the blood rain finally ceases, and the entire street is stuck in an awkward standstill. The silence is suffocating. Bakugou felt immense relief. He almost wanted to hug you. You knew that you had to move fast, considering all the damage done to the street. There were many people in critical conditions, and the hero work was far from over. Before you even realize it, you're already filtering through all the voices and searching for the people who need help the most, so you can go to them first. Your eyes under the blindfold are winced tight in concentration as you are muttering quietly to yourself. And that's when a sharp force strikes your chest. Bakugou heard a muted choking sound, and then a heavy thud. His instincts spun him around faster than the speed of light, and when he doesn't see you standing beside him like you were just a moment ago, he glances down. His eyes land on your still form lying on the concrete, and that is the moment that the first raindrop hits his nose. He narrows his eyes at the metal rod lodged in your chest. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thoughts come to the surface, bringing his blood to a boil under his skin. He is frozen absurdly still. His knees are locked up, and he doesn't understand what he's looking at. 𝑦/N. That's not right. That can't be right. Where had that thing come from? Why aren't you moving? Why does he have a ball of nausea knotting up a storm in his stomach? He is obviously reading the situation wrong. No, there's a rod in your chest. You aren't moving, and the rain is wetting you. The rod fell off the building, and neither of you saw it coming. You were too focused on helping the others to sense the danger coming at you. You're going to get a cold if you don't get up. The rod is in your chest. Bakugou drops to his knees beside you, and his face is painted with ugly horror, as if he's offended by what he's looking at. He slips his gloved hand under your neck and tries to shake you. 𝗧/N. What are you doing? Get up. He yells as if you just tripped over on the footpath, and you're being too dramatic. You are playing around, and it needs to stop. It's just a scraped knee. This isn't the time for jokes. Because you are joking, right? 𝗧/N. Get the fuck up. Take it out. He glances at the jagged metal pole splitting your flesh, and a gag comes to the back of his throat. No, it can't be true. Without even thinking, Bakugou clenches his jaw and reaches forward in a panic, ripping your blindfold off your face, over your head, and he throws it away. He looks down at you, hoping to see your eyes open and alive. And your eyes are open. But your head lolls to the side weakly, and your lips are slightly parted. There is no tension in the muscles of your face, and Bakugou is seeing your eyes for the very first time. He sinks into the beautiful intricacies and golden layers of them, and he starts to drown. He is quick to lose himself, mesmerized by the beauty in them. But he doesn't feel relief in seeing your eyes open like he thought he would, because something about them is wrong. Something is missing. Light. How could this really be the first time Bakugou is seeing your eyes? You'd been friends for years. Your eyes worked well, and there didn't seem to be anything wrong with them. Hell, they were beautiful, even to him. He hadn't entertained you when you tried to explain your reasoning for the blindfold, but maybe he should have, because it must be important if it baited you to keep these beauties hidden from the world. Bakugou had asked many times over the years for you to take the blindfold off, and often got annoyed when you denied him. You stayed true to whatever stupid rule it was that you were following, and you kept your eyes hidden. It wasn't very long before you realized how much it pissed Bakugou off, and so it became a running joke. He never found it funny. But the plan was to keep them from him until the day that you died. And it seemed that you had. After wanting it for so long, Bakugou fucking hated that this is the first time he's actually seeing them. When you're not responding to him. When you're limp on the cold, wet floor. When you're playing dead and your eyes are the lead actors because they perfectly fit the part. He is frozen and can't stop staring at them. He can't bring himself to pull away, but it feels so grossly wrong. He feels sick. He's seeing them, but they're not seeing him, and they're not seeing anything at all. Your eyes are dead. Why/N? His voice is barely above a whisper. It's strained as if grief had grabbed him by the throat so tight that he was bleeding into his lungs. His hands hover in the air as if he doesn't know how to use them. Why the hell are you not moving? Why are you looking at nothing? Wake the fuck up. I'm serious, idiot. You gotta fix this. His voice is more stern and scary than before. It's sharp and deep, and he wants you to hear it. He needs you to listen to him. Just this once. Fucking cut it out. He grabs your shoulder and starts to shake you violently, wanting to close his eyes, but he can't bring himself to take them off you. He just can't comprehend this. How did he get here? Why is he shaking you when you were standing beside him with a smile on your face only a moment ago? Why do you seem so dead? His face is cramping, trying to conceal a cry. You gotta get out of the rain. You hate the rain, right? You told me that once. His voice is borderline begging for a response, and his grip against you has gotten weaker. Well, I hate it too, so don't make me stand out here any longer, you fucking bitch. The last word seems to echo down the street. Bakugou's breathing is heavy now, as panic starts to set in and take control of his body. He couldn't stop the panting if he tired. It's dash. He takes another glance at the rod and chokes. It's just metal. You're not gonna die from this. He considers ripping it out because it doesn't deserve to be inside you. It's hurting you. But he stops himself, because he was absolutely sure that there was no way the rod was what had you lying on the ground right now. There's no way a stupid piece of metal could do that to you. You weren't dead. Not like this. Not you. Not the next top pro. Not someone who could manipulate the cosmic forces. Your strength couldn't be in vain. You couldn't be killed by a fucking pole. Not with all the work you've done. The gift you had. The years spent training with him. You were going to beat him to the #1 spot, so why the hell won't you get up? Why is your blood littering the path where his knees are? That can't be your blood. You were too strong to bleed. Is this a joke? That's how you want to do this. His voice cracks with an angry sob, and he has tears in the corners of his eyes. He almost punches the concrete. You're not gonna let this be the end. After everything. Don't tell me that you've been that weak the entire time. You're pathetic. Stop playing around and get the fuck up. Bakugou lets go of your shoulder in an overwhelmed fit and shoves you away, turning his body in the opposite direction to avert his gaze from your unresponsive body. His eyebrows are cinched in and a tear falls down his cheek, mixing with the raindrops. Then he turns back to look at you again, just to be sure. He needs to be sure that it's real, but he also can't think of anything worse. He gets another dizzy spell when he sees you still in the position he left you in. It looks uncomfortable, and you haven't blinked in a while. He wishes you would just do something. Anything. Bakugou's jaw is slacked open just like yours, and his eyes are stinging. Why aren't yours? If it's hurting that bad, you should be crying, right? Bakugou feels like he is about to explode. He just wants to hear you cry. He blinks a few times, and his whole body is shaking. This had to be some kind of sick prank. Somebody was messing with him, and you were in on it. But your body was still on the ground, motionless and growing cold. Bakugou remembered that he had hit his head in the fight before. He hit his head hard, and probably had a concussion. That has to be why he's seeing nonsense, and why he's so dizzy and so close to throwing up. He feels like the whole world is laughing at him, and he has to be imagining all of this right now, because he can feel the blood running down his neck. And injuries are reserved for people like him. People with weaknesses. Not you. Not 𝗧𝗵𝗲. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is above weakness and was always going to be. Bakugou reaches forward again, grabbing both shoulders and pulling you up towards him. He groans as your body bends at the hips, but your spine is like overcooked pasta, bringing your loose head to rock forward and slam into his chest. Your arms are weak and hanging loose in their sockets. Bakugou holds you there against his chest, wrapping both of his arms around your torso, and he digs his fingers into the fabric on your back. He clenches his hands against you, and is relieved that he can still feel the heat in your skin. Your body is completely limp, and the only reason you're not falling back onto the concrete is because he's holding on for dear life. He's scared to let you go. He can't look at your face again. Not until it gives him a smile. He squeezes his eyes shut because he can't bear to see anymore. And Bakugou Katsuki finally understands why you wore the damn blindfold. Kirishima and Kaminari are on the 2 chairs in Bakugou's hospital room. They had been there alone, without any words, for 2 hours. They are both staring lifelessly at the floor by their shoes in front of them, and their faces are scrunched up with so much pain and grief that they might leave permanent wrinkles. They didn't dare to talk. Kirishima is holding his hands together and squeezing so tight that his knuckles had turned white. He had his injuries tended to, as did all the other students that were littered throughout the hospital in different rooms. But he was still dizzy and nauseous, as he couldn't come to accept what had happened. Kirishima didn't understand how everything turned out so ugly. The simple mission had turned into a nightmare. A trauma. Something nobody would ever be able to forget. A ghastly day. A tragedy. Kirishima glances up at his unconscious friend lying on the hospital bed, wrapped in bandages and covered in blood. Kirishima is relieved that the nurses were finally able to sedate him after his meltdown. He deserved to rest. Kirishima can't stop his crazed mind from going back to the battlefield, again and again, making him feel sicker each time. He was having flashbacks, and he just wanted to be freed from it. He was the first person to get to Bakugou after your accident. He rushed over, and once he realized what he was looking at, he froze like a statue. His face turned marble and he felt like he was dreaming. When some of the others came running over not long after, Kirishima snapped back to reality and realized that as much as he was hurting, he had to stay strong. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was in trouble and Bakugou was losing his shit over it. He needed to take a step back and pull himself together. Bakugou was screaming and wouldn't let you go, as he rocked forwards and backwards with you on his lap. He held your head against his chest and completely ignored the huge metal rod that had split your heart in two. Bakugou was covered in blood and tears, and his knees were getting bruised on the concrete. He was going insane, and Kirishima knew he had to get Bakugou away from you for his own good. Bakugou was clearly in denial, and it was heartbreaking for his friend to witness. Bakugou yelled out again and again that you were just faking it, and none of this was real, as the people started to crowd around. He said that everyone needed to stay the fuck back, and to leave them alone. He had completely lost his mind. Kirishima had never seen Bakugou so inconsolable. At first, he didn't know what to do. His heart had broken into 1,000 pieces. And by the time everyone else arrived, it took 5 whole people to pry Bakugou off of your dead body. He didn't want to let you go. He fought and fought to hold on. But since he never once used his quirk to stop them, Kirishima knew that deep down, Bakugou understood what was happening. He knew he needed to let you go, but he simply wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. Once they finally pulled him away, Midoriya restrained him with Black Whip in hopes of calming him down, though he himself could barely move. Midoriya was staring blankly at your body on the road, not daring to even breathe. Kirishima wrapped his arms around Bakugou and used all of his strength to hug him, despite how hard he was trying to push him away. Bakugou kept his eyes closed the whole time, and was shaking and cussing like a crazy man. As much as he pushed and pushed, Kirishima refused to let go of him, closing his eyes and clenching his teeth. He knew Bakugou needed someone to worry about him. Best Jeanist ran over and dropped to your side, his eyes wide and his hands shaking as he stared down at your unconscious form. He hesitated, still and stunned. As he realized what was happening, all your surrounding classmates came to understand too. Their faces were blank with horror, as none of them had started to cry yet. They couldn't even breathe, let alone cry. The girls and boys who were standing around understood why Best Jeanist wasn't moving to help you take the rot out, and the reason turned their blood to ice. It wasn't long before the street was filled with screams. The girls shrieked like they were watching a horror movie, being brought to tears by terror alone, as they couldn't possibly comprehend that this was real. They turned away, unable to look at your lifeless eyes and limp limbs, and the rain continued to pour down. Kirishima remembers holding on to Bakugou for dear life. He remembers the pain and fear, and he couldn't get it out of his head, no matter how much he wanted to. Many of the students had been injured. Some were in comas too, as well as the pros. There was pain and loss all around, but it all felt futile compared to what happened to you. Kirishima and the others had no real reason to think that you were dead, yet. The doctor hadn't made an official statement, the teachers hadn't said anything, and nobody was allowed in your operating room. He could assume that you had just been knocked out and were going to find some magical way to come out on top like you always did. But deep down, Kirishima knew. There was a feeling in his gut that gave the truth away, and it was the same for everyone else. That's why no one could talk. Barely any of the students or teachers or pros on scene were actually able to even cry. Everyone was sort of frozen, confused as to why it seemed like one of the students had died, when it simply couldn't be true. There wasn't even time for a real panic, because everyone there could feel the outcome already. They were stuck in limbo, stuck in the awkward transition of denial to acceptance, and it was not an easy path. But silence was the first step. 3 weeks later, it was the day of the funeral. It only felt fitting that it was raining. The clouds above the crowd were thick and black, as if personifying the gloominess of the day, carrying everyone's grief. They kept the sun away. Everyone wore black. Everyone was wet, cold, and somber. It had been 3 weeks of bad weather, weeping kids, and absolutely no school. The government had given UA a 1-month grace period to grieve their lost one. Of course, the kids couldn't go to school with the way they had all been affected. How could they be expected to act normal and continue classes when they had witnessed the gruesome death of their close friend? How could they stay focused on their homework? How could they live at all? The teachers were no better. All Might and Aizawa were physically incapable of putting on their brave faces on for everyone else, so they had gone home to their families during the break too. As much as it was hard for people like them to admit, your death had rocked their boats. Heroes, teachers, and civilians alike had been utterly shaken by what happened that day. Both of them had acknowledged your strength and potential as far surpassing their own. For years, they had seen your power outshine anything they had ever seen. It was clear that they had no doubts that you would go on to become the top hero, and much further than that. Your death had shocked all of Japan, not just your town. All regions with access to internet were informed of the tragedy that occurred that afternoon. How you, the magnificent golden child, the hero prodigy, had fallen victim to the unmerciful nature of the cosmic forces. It was a fate for you that nobody had seen coming. You were always thought of as a superior for your age and category. Someone who could not be brought down. A fighter. A young girl, burdened by the weight of the world, but strong enough to carry it. To them, you were the symbol of strength. A picture-perfect idea of an unbreakable hero. Someone to fall back on. A friend, a mentor, a sister. Anything anyone needed you to be, that's what you became. And you died. Just like that. No last words, no noble sacrifice, and no final wish. A metal pole fell from a roof, and you didn't see it coming. A simple, inanimate, insentient object was what stole 𝗧𝗏 from the world, and only God knows how much it was going to need you. You had decades of years to live, lives to save, and records to break. All of that was waiting for you in the future. Your heroism was guaranteed to take over the ranks and the counties, and there were assumed to be no limits to how many people you would have been able to help. It took a long time for your classmates and teachers to fully accept your death, and they still weren't there yet. It was aired on the news, taking headlines and billboards as your name spread through Japan like a wildfire. It was such an untimely death, and all that strength turned out to be in vain. Yes, you defeated the villain. But at what cost? Your life. And in turn, the the lives of everyone who cared about you. Kirishima, Kaminari, Uraraka, Midoriya, Ashido, all of them. All of 1A. They were consumed in their grieving of you. Unable to leave their houses, curled up in their parents' arms. The list extended all the way to the support classes. You were already at the top, and they looked up to you so much. They had lost their closest mentor. They couldn't begin to stomach how someone with your strength was able to die so easily, so meaninglessly. How, if those at the very top could meet death on a random sunny Tuesday, what made them any different? Your mortality made theirs more evident. Nobody had quite been themselves since that day. Barely eating, barely sleeping, wasting the days away with the curtains closed. Anxiety had kept them locked indoors. You had made people second-guess their pursuits of heroism. And Kigo, that poor man. He had lost the closest person to him. His adopted daughter, someone who he had raised when he himself was not far off a child. He had devoted so much of his life to making yours better. When he first met you, he vowed to bring you into the world in a way that helped you see the beauty in it. He healed your wounds and mended your broken heart by picking the shards up himself. He loved you so much. Too much. Too much for his own heart to handle as he stood at the very front of the funeral ceremony. His head is low, his muscles tight, and his wings are sagging in the muddy soil, though he doesn't care. Kigo has no light in his eyes, and he doesn't even have the will to raise his head. His face is covered in messy stubble, despite him wearing his best suit. Standing in front of everyone, he looks as though his life has been stolen from him. His charisma has been drained from his body, and he's completely bled dry. He looks destroyed and utterly pathetic. A shell of who he used to be. 3 weeks after the accident, he is still in shock. He had taken 3 weeks of personal leave from hero work. He hadn't had the strength to leave the house the whole time. He didn't have the courage to go into your room, not even once. He often stood on the other side of the door with his hand on the handle, frozen, until he eventually gave up and headed back to his room. He couldn't stand the idea of seeing the way you had left it. There were traces of you everywhere, and his heart was too broken to accept it. He'd rather keep his eyes closed. He'd rather wear a blindfold. The house he once shared with you was a complete mess. The dishes hadn't been done in weeks, and there was an equal amount of takeout trash laid over the countertops. The floors weren't swept, and the blinds or windows hadn't been opened since the day he got the news. The apartment was a perfect reflection of the state of his mental health. He had fallen apart, and it was showing. He just couldn't stand to be anyone's hero when he had just lost his. Kigo kept his eyes on the floor in front of him as the funeral speaker was talking, and his hands were clenched by his sides. He couldn't bring himself to look at the faces of your classmates. Not when they loved you just as he did. Not when he could see you in all of them. You had a way of influencing the people around you, inspiring them, guiding them, and it was obvious. He could see parts of you in everyone he looked at, and it was suffocating how much it hurt his chest. Kigo was put in charge of invitations, and it was easily the hardest thing he ever had to do. To try and think of everyone who you would have wanted there. He put himself in your shoes and it fucking ripped him apart, thinking of all the people you held close. He settled on inviting your classmates, your teachers, and the pros that you had worked with over the years. He invited the whole Todoroki family, and they all stood together, wearing matching suits with their heads low. Nobody had ever seen Endeavor look so human. The girls from 3A are standing together in a row. Uraraka, Ashido have their eyes squeezed shut, and they're holding hands while sharing an umbrella. Tsuyu is sharing one with Jairu, and they're both crying. Yaoyorozu has a napkin covering her mouth to quieten her sobs. The boys are standing together too. Shuji has one arm wrapped around Tokoyami, and the other around Shiro. Kaminari has his body turned towards Kirishima, with his head against his best friend's chest. Kirishima is supporting the back of his head while trying to keep his posture straight and tall. Kirishima put everything he had into staying strong. His lip was quivering and he had deep forehead wrinkles forming, but he knew he could break down later when he was home. He could let everything come out then. But he had to be manly now when there are so many people that need support. They just lost Y/N, and they couldn't lose him too. He lets Kaminari rest against his chest while he sobs, and Kirishima holds his breath to the point of choking to stop himself from crying. He couldn't break. Not yet. Midoriya glances to his right when he hears sniffling noises. He looks up at Ida and sees that he isn't wearing his glasses, and he's also trying not to cry, but he's not doing a good job. His hair is messy, but his suit is slick. His one hand free from the umbrella is clenched in a tight fist by his side and quivering. Ida had lost so many people, and nobody knew that better than him. Midoriya thins his lips and places a gentle hand up on his friend's shoulder. Then Midoriya looks over his left shoulder and sees 𝐓𝗏𝗧 sitting on the opposite side to the rest of the class, with his family and the other pros. 𝐓𝗏𝗧's eyes are filled with tears, and his posture looks weak as if he's about to crumble into himself. Midoriya knew he always did that, as it was his only way of self-soothing. But he couldn't now. He had to remain standing. Midoriya can see in his body language how hard that is for him, and that is when he notices Natsuo's hand wrapped around 𝐓𝗏𝗧's shoulders, helping to keep him standing. He was glad his brother was being kind to him at a time like this. Fuyumi is sobbing into her cardigan sleeve, and she looks beyond heartbroken. Midoriya thought that they must have been closer than they let on. And Midoriya didn't know much about your relationship with 𝐓𝗏𝗧, other than that you had grown up together and were very close now. Midoriya knew that your death was going to be harder on some than it was on others, and 𝐓𝗏𝗧 was definitely one of those people. As he turns back around, he lowers his head. His eyebrows are knitted together so tight that they might never go back to normal. Midoriya had a pain in his chest that felt like his lungs were on fire. It was only natural for him to wonder what more he could have done to change this ghastly outcome. He spent days on end beating himself up over the fact that he could have stopped this. But then again, so did everyone else. The truth was that nobody could have done anything. Because if you couldn't see it coming, how could they? There was no use for what-ifs. You were gone. Midoriya swallows a huge lump in his throat and looks over his other shoulder, right to the back of the class, and he sees Bakugou. He is standing away from everyone, far behind the crowd, all on his own. He has his suit on and his head down. He has no umbrella, and is completely drenched by the rain. His hair is hanging over his eyes, and Midoriya's heart throbs at the sight of him. What a tragedy! Without having time to think about it, Midoriya's legs start to move on their own. He walks away from his seat, and he slowly walks down the aisle, towards the back. A few students look his way as he passes them, but his eyes are glued to Bakugou. He couldn't stand to see him like this. Midoriya approaches Bakugou, and when he speaks, his voice is incredibly soft. "Kaken, do you want an umbrella?" Bakugou doesn't even look at him. He keeps staring straight ahead, and his body is dangerously stiff. It looks like he isn't even breathing. No. Midoriya hears his voice crack, and he knows the reason that Bakugou doesn't want an umbrella. He's known him long enough to know that he has always hated the rain. But right now, Bakugou is grateful for it. Because nobody can tell that he's crying. Nobody except for Midoriya. His childhood best friend, the boy he'd grown up with, who knew exactly what Bakugou's crying face looks like. Raindrops on his cheeks couldn't fool him. Midoriya stands there still for a few seconds, staring at his friend. His mouth is slightly agape and frowning, and his free hand is sort of floating in the air, because he wants to reach out. He wants to hug Bakugou and tell him that it will all be okay. But how could he? Bakugou had lost you. There was nothing okay about that. Midoriya felt like he had failed. And that sickening feeling in the pit of his gut was present in just about every single person at the ceremony. That is what comes after death, loss. And fuck, had they lost. Midoriya is torn between what to do, knowing it was unlikely that Bakugou was going to be able to receive any of his words the way he wanted him to. And truth be told, he wasn't even sure he was in a place to offer him anything, because Midoriya was just as melancholy and defeated as everyone else. But he wants to. It is in his nature to help people, and Bakugou is clearly in need of some help. Midoriya just doesn't know how. Go away, duh. Bakugou mutters quietly, and in his weakness, it feels more like a plead than an order. Then he swallows. Please. Midoriya hears and recognizes the desperation in his voice. It didn't sound like him. Bakugou wasn't himself. The embarrassment in his unsteady voice, and resistance to surrender. Bakugou wasn't allowing himself time to grieve in front of the others, but it was obviously ripping him apart inside, pretending to be okay. That was why he was standing behind everyone else. He was here for you, and he didn't want anyone else looking at him. In understanding of that, Midoriya lowers his head and turns around, slowly walking back towards his seat. He is disappointed that he can't help Bakugou, but he knows the only thing that will heal this kind of wound is time. The speaker goes on for a while, and eventually, it is Kigo's turn to say his speech. Obviously, no one could ever be fully prepared for something like this. A funeral is home to so much pain, and that much is obvious, as he slowly steps up to the podium in front of everyone, and his body looks weak. He had already lost some weight and his cheeks were sunken in. He abandons his umbrella to the floor as he walks up to the front, and he finally looks up at the sea of tormented faces. He takes a deep breath and looks around. On the left side, he saw all of your friends and classmates, all trying to console each other under the revolting conditions of the day. His heart hurts to see how much losing you had ruined them. They were kids, just like you. And now they had to keep moving forward while you took your eternal rest beneath the soil. Kigo wanted to vomit. And as he turns to the right side, where he sees all your teachers and fellow pros, that feeling amplifies. They are doing no better than he is at hiding their sorrow. Kigo hesitates for a long time, and everyone can see how much it is hurting him to have to talk to everyone while in his state. He deserves to be curled up in a bed, but he has to do this, despite how much it kills him. He lets out a sigh and straightens his spine a little, pulling himself together. I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming today. I know the weather is unforgiving, but I sort of feel like it matches how we're all feeling right now. I honestly can't imagine sunny skies. He looks down at his shoes and clears his throat before looking up again. As we all know, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was an amazing woman. Not only did her power make her one of the strongest people in the industry, but her mental strength and resistance was more than anyone I've ever encountered, even since she was young. Despite dealing with so much trauma and horrible things in her life, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 never grew bitter. She was never crushed by the pressure on her shoulders, as I'm sure many others would have been. She stayed kind and soft when the world gave her no reason to be. She was gentle, right until the end. And she taught me so much over the years. She really changed my life. And she told me so much about all of you too. I know how much better her life became when she came to you, and I have you to thank for that. A few people in the crowd start to sob a little harder. Kigo clears his throat again, looking slightly more relaxed and genuine now. Thank you to all of her friends and classmates for taking care of her and showing her what friendship is about. Thank you to Eraserhead for being the best teacher she could have hoped for. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you to Mirko and 𝐻𝗏𝗏 for mentoring her through her internships. I know she learned so much from you both. Thank you 𝗏𝗏𝗏 for welcoming her into your home and for supporting me in raising her. Thank you All Might for being an amazing idol. I know she looked up to you. And thank you to the Chubu government for bringing this beautiful little girl to me. She helped me in more ways than I can express. She gave my life purpose, and I am so grateful for everything that followed after meeting her. Kigo raises his eyes to look at the very back of the group, and he clears his throat again to swallow a cry. And finally, I want to say thank you to Katsuki. He says clearly, Bakugou, I hope you know how much you meant to her. Bakugou's eyes widen after being called upon, and a few of the students turn around to look at him. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 never shut up about you. For years, every time she called me, your name was mentioned at some point. She told me how much you were helping her with training, how you always sparred with her, and helped her get so much stronger. You taught her to do her first pull-up, he says in a half-hearted joke, but reels it back in. She told me a few weeks ago that you were one of the only people who she truly trusted, deep down. You always kept it real with her, kid, and she loved it. I feel that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 grew into herself when she met you. So again, thank you so much. I'm glad she had you. Bakugou feels his throat starting to close up as those words sink in. His mouth falls open, and fresh tears come to the surface. He wants to thank Kigo for saying that, but he doesn't have the words. He forgets how to speak completely in that moment. And as a sob sneaks past his will, Bakugou suddenly turns around and holds one hand against his mouth, squeezing his eyes shut. He hunches over and starts to cry into the palm of his hand. The nearby students and teachers who are all familiar with Bakugou's character all start to become overwhelmed, seeing him cry. It was like a domino effect of breakdowns. Nobody had ever seen him sob like that. So breathless and tight and painful. Without any words needing to be shared, 𝐒𝐻𝐲 walked past the crowd of crying, gawking people, staring only at Bakugou. He holds himself upright and strong, clenches his jaw, and walks to his friend, placing a hand on his shoulder, gently pulling him. "Fuck off." Bakugou shrugs him away. "Bakugou." 𝐒𝐻𝐲 reaches again, his hand a little stiff this time, and takes a step closer. Weak and completely ruined, Bakugou miraculously allows himself to turn around. He burrows his face into his hands and his head comes to land against 𝐒𝐻𝐲's chest. Bakugou keeps his eyes squeezed shut and his body curls over in pain. 𝐒𝐻𝐲 wraps his arms around his back. "I can't fucking dash." A sharp gasp cuts himself off. "It's alright bro, I know." 𝐒𝐻𝐲 closes his eyes softly and gently rubs Bakugou's back, feeling his lungs skipping and jumping for air. She dash Bakugou stutters 1,000 times before he just closes his mouth. "I know." Katsuki's mom was prepared for the worst. Mitsuki waited in the hall by the door for an hour, all too aware of the fact that her only son had just been out to attend the funeral of one of his closest friends. And it was held in the rain, just to emphasize his anguish. She was feeling gloomy and heavy, thinking of how hard it must have been for him. As she hears the car roll up out the front, she feels her body become jittery. Mitsuki had met you a few times over the years, and was always a big fan of you. Katsuki brought you home with him every odd weekend, and it was usually to prove to you how good her cooking was. She liked having you in the house. But more so than that, she really liked how you made her son behave. Calmer. He had changed a lot during his 3 years at UA, and Mitsuki secretly thanked you for that. She saw the way you influenced him, and it was like a breath of fresh air. But she also knew very well that you didn't have any parents of your own. And while you did have a beloved guardian, Hawks, he was often away from home on business. So, she was always ecstatic to offer you her hospitality. Hearing the news about your death hurt her, but it destroyed her son. She didn't know what to expect of him when he was to come inside, but she knew it was going to be dreadful. So when she opens the door for him, her face is already scrunched up in pain that she just can't hide. She was not strong enough to pretend that this wasn't hard on her. Seeing her son's face was worse than any pain she'd felt before. There is nothing worse than a helpless mother, forced to watch their child suffering. It is an awful feeling of weakness, as she comes to realize that she is powerless against the forces of the outside world. Both hands come up to her face in horror, as she barely recognizes Katsuki. He has his head down, and is dripping wet from head to toe. She can't even see his eyes, but she knows that he has been crying. She can feel it. And in the moment, she wants nothing more than to step towards him and throw her arms around him like a mother bear who protects her cubs from predators. Kadash, she stops herself as Katsuki steps inside, dragging his wet feet through the door and right past her. Her body shifts to watch him as he takes slow, heavy steps towards the staircase. There is a thick cloud of doom following him, and Mitsuki can see it. That feeling of powerless comes back as she watches her son mope up to his room, despite how much she wants to go after him. A few seconds later, she hears his bedroom door close upstairs, and then she waits alone, in silence, for 3 minutes, trying to choke back her own shock and horror as she clutches the necklace around her neck. She thinks and can't get out of her own mind. Then, after what feels like years, she decides to follow him. Once Katsuki made it to his room and closed the door, he stripped off his suit blazer. He dropped it to the floor in a sad, wet pile, and he stepped over to his bed. Katsuki's bright ruby-red eyes had turned grayish with the weight of this day, as his body tips like an old oak tree and falls down onto his mattress. He doesn't care that his clothes are wet. He doesn't care if he lives or dies. Katsuki lets out one short sob, before he reaches up to grab one of his pillows. His body turns to the side as he brings the pillow into his stomach, wrapping both arms around it. Katsuki curls around the pillow as if it was going to try and get away from him. He squeezes his eyes shut so tight that he starts to see stars, as he fights off an impending breakdown. His whole body is tensing and shaking, and he is every possible variation of bitter. Then, to his shock and relief, he hears the door to his room slowly open. Katsuki doesn't look up, nor say a word. and it becomes an immediate silent agreement that neither him nor his mother were going to try and talk. It was times like these that silence was stronger than words. It meant more. And, to be honest, neither of them had any words they were comfortable sharing. Mitsuki walks into the room, gently closing the door behind her, and she takes slow steps towards his bed. She looks at the sweet curve of her son's face as she slowly lies down on the empty side of the bed. He stays quiet, very aware of what she was doing, and his continued silence was confirmation that she could keep going. He was allowing it. Mitsuki silently crawls up beside him, biting her bottom lip to stop herself from crying, and she rests up on the pillow near his head. She sits still and stares at him for a while, just watching his face twitch as he desperately tries to hold himself together. She remembers what used to work when he was a little boy. When he came home with scraped knees, crying, and just needing his mommy. So, trusting her mother's intuition, she slowly reaches her hand up and gently strokes Katsuki's head. She notices how he twitches and seems to relax slightly under her familiar touch, just as he always did when he was a kid. She starts to stroke his hair to soothe him. The air between them was thick and filled with poison. "I love you, kid," she whispers. It wasn't much. It wasn't going to make him feel better or change what had happened. In hindsight, telling him that wasn't going to do anything except piss him off for assuming that it would help, or that he needed help at all. But Mitsuki just wanted to remind him. Somebody is here who loves him. Somebody who will never stop loving him. He will remain a man that was loved for as long as she was alive, and Mitsuki didn't want him to forget. Strangely enough, it actually starts to soothe him. Feeling too broken to even try to uphold his spiky exterior, Katsuki surrenders to the child in him that really needs his mom right now. He starts to cry. Short, choking sobs that obviously aren't easy to let out. As Katsuki keeps his eyes closed, feeling his mother's loving touch on his head, he just can't keep it in anymore. And it hurt. It hurts his throat, his lungs, and his ego. But all of that pain is nothing compared to the ache in his heart. A few tears run down Mitsuki's cheeks too, as she knows how hard it is for someone like Katsuki to actually let himself grieve. It wasn't natural for him, but it had to happen. He had to release some of his hurt, and so she offered him her most tenderness. They stay like that for a while. Both of them are brought back to his childhood, feeling that familiar sense of family and unconditional love. It wasn't something the two of them welled in very often, but now was the time for it. Katsuki had gone back to his roots. His childhood self. He hit rock bottom emotionally, and it had fucked him up so bad that he actually wanted his mother's care. It was the first time in years that he had wanted this, and while it is hard to embrace it, Katsuki didn't know anybody else that knew him well enough to actually bring him comfort. No one could care for him like this mom could. Katsuki only allows himself 10 minutes to cry before he caps himself. The ordeal was short, and there was still resistance garnishing every single sob that managed to escape, but this was his version of grief. Restraint. After that time is up, Katsuki's muted sobs slowly start to turn into gasps for air, until eventually, he is just breathing. In and out. Slowly. His eyes are still closed, but they're not clenched anymore. His pillow is wet beneath his face, and his body is relaxed. Mitsuki notices his breathing change, and she continues to stroke him, happy that he was finally calm. And a few minutes later, he finally manages to drift off to sleep. Katsuki wakes up to a tickle on his cheek. He slowly blinks himself back to life and opens his eyes to find himself lying on his side, in a grassy clearing. The grass was long and had its fingers holding Katsuki where his body met the ground. His arms, legs, and face were being caressed by the grass as it blew in the cool, midnight wind. His temper is short as he sits up to get away from the invasive grass, although it was only holding him. He looks back down to where he had just been lying, and sees a mark in the green that perfectly outlined his body. The shape of him was glistening in the moonlight. "Fuck," he whispers, cinching his eyebrows. And then he looks up and realizes he is in a forest. He is at the center of what seems to be a small, grassy clearing in that forest. A clearing just for him, where he had been asleep 2 seconds ago. And as he hastily looks around, he sees trees on all 4 sides of him, as far as the eye can see. They are foreign trees that he's never seen before. He narrows his eyes into the forest that is very thick, and there are parts of the shadows that are so grossly black that he can't see anything at all in them. He is surrounded and swallowed by darkness. Then he sees a flash of color, and his head swings to his right to catch a glimpse. He sees a person. A woman. She is walking through the forest, but it looks more like she's floating by the way her body moves. The wind moves past him like the forest is taking a deep breath, and it picks up the flowing layers of the woman's beautiful white dress. He blinks and she's gone. Oi. He stands up and narrows his eyes to where she had just disappeared behind the tree. And then, to his left, he sees it again. He spins around quickly, catching another look. She floats past a beam of light that came through the leaves, and the rich silky white fabric of her dress glistens under the moonlight, turning luminescent for a moment. She takes a graceful leap. Her toes are pointed beneath the hem of her dress, and she jumps behind the trunk of the next tree, disappearing immediately after. Hey! He takes a step forward. Hearing leaves rustle behind him makes him spin around, a little more crazy this time. He doesn't see her moving through the forest this time. Now, she is hiding behind a thick tree and not moving. The only reason he knows she's even there is because her dress is flowing in the breeze out on one side of it, giving her away. I can see you, 𝗵𝗃. Who are you, 𝗵𝗃? Katsuki is aware that he's dreaming now. It was the only logical explanation for the ominous, eerie feeling that seemed to be resting in the flora of the forest. But what Katsuki doesn't understand is why the hell his stupid brain is making him dream of creepy, godlike women frolicking around him in a dark forest, dressed in white and without shoes. He feels like a pervert in his own mind. Katsuki. The sharp voice is also soft, like a tack in a vat of warm honey, and it's louder than his was, as if it's on a megaphone, bellowing over the whole area. But at the same time, it's quiet. It's soft and intimate, whispering right in his ear. Katsuki chokes as he realizes that he knows that voice. He knows that voice. Y/N. Katsuki. The feminine syllable drags on, as if teasing him. He doesn't know how the voice is contradicting its own vigor like that, but he can hear that it's strong and persuasive. It's intelligent, and the authority in it is potent. Show your damn face. A noise darts past Katsuki's left ear and he swings his head to that side at the perfect time, but sees nothing. Then again on his right side. He manages to catch a glimpse of the dress again, and spins to follow it. But it's teleporting. It's jumping from tree to tree, and moving faster than he can keep up with. He starts to spin in circles as his eyes follow the movement and subtle sounds, and he's turning back and forth with overbearing desperation. Damn it. What the hell are you doing? Over here. He turns around again, and sees the woman facing him for the first time. She is waving at him, but she's standing in the shadows, and her hair is covering her face. Somehow Katsuki can still see a grin on her lips. You think this is funny? Fucking with me for no reason. Right in front of him, the woman darts to the left in a flash. As Katsuki turns, he feels the air shifting around him. As he stands in the center of the grassy clearing, he turns and the air drastically changes from a calming breeze, and it picks up until it's a roaring wind. It follows his movements and starts to overtake him as Katsuki narrows his eyes through all the new dust and grass being picked up. Fucking stop. He brings his arms up to his face to try and block, but he can't breathe anymore. The wind is too fast for him to catch any. Left and right, his head swings fast enough to give him whiplash, as panic starts to kick in. He can see at least 3 of the woman's duplicate bodies spinning circles around him. It's all happening too fast. And suddenly, the woman pounces. Katsuki jumps as she dives through the wall of dust circling him and tackles him. Katsuki's back hits the ground and the breath is knocked clean out of his lungs. In the next second, he wakes up. Katsuki heaves for air before he realizes he is back in the safety of his bed. He subconsciously reaches up to grab his throat, as it was stinging as if he'd been screaming. He swallows thickly because his mouth is dry, and he can taste iron. He notices a weight on the right side of his body that makes him turn over his shoulder. And then behind him, he sees his mother, still fast asleep on the bed with him. He breathes heavily, staring at the grief that was on her face, even as she was sleeping. Just a fucking dream. Katsuki rolls back over and lets out a deep sigh, finally adjusting to his newfound consciousness. His eyes are wide and awake as he stares at the desk in his room. A fucking weird-ass dream.